Chapter 1633. Unlike the fertile plains of the central continent, the continent of demons was filled with mountains and lakes. Mist lingered over the mountains and lakes, soaking into the endless forests and making them even more verdant. There was no right or wrong here. It only followed the most ancient law of nature: natural selection, survival of the fittest. A large river flowed like a dragon between the mountains and rivers. Suddenly, it swam to a cliff and suddenly soared into the sky. It flew straight down and turned into a 1,000-foot waterfall, stirring up a mist that filled the sky. Passing through the mist and arriving behind the waterfall, there was another world hidden there. A dwelling was hidden there. It was where the spiritual veins of mountains and rivers gathered. It blocked out the rumbling of water. The quiet dwelling was pitch black without any light at all. A pair of dark green cat eyes were extraordinarily large. With a single blink, they illuminated the darkness. Sigh, the nine-tailed fox empress might be noble and powerful, but it's a pity that she's evil. Xianyue held her cheeks in distress. With her rather impressive innate spiritual beast bloodline and a certain person's care, she had already undergone the third heavenly tribulation. She was 17 or 18 years old now. During the Battle of Jadeite Palace, she had suffered a strike from Little Anne. Afterwards, she used her innate abilities to come back from the dead and break free from the nine-tailed fox empress Su Mingrao's charms, fleeing far away from the Dragon Province. Afterwards, the 9 provinces were devoured by the space-devouring beasts, and a certain person discovered her in the wilderness of the Frost Province. He casually tossed her to the continent of demons. Although she was filled with resentment towards Su Mingrao for using her as a shield, she often could not help but miss the beautiful, luxurious Jadeite Palace. She could not help but let out another long sigh. Meow! Suddenly, she clenched her tiny fists and tried her best to pull herself together. As a meow, I still have to rely on myself. Don't you agree, Big Black? 2 dolls were placed before her. One of them was woven from black cloth. The ends of the thread were crooked, and there was a ball of fur inside. It seemed like a standing black ox, but it was so fat that it basically had no neck. The 2 words, North Moon, were carefully engraved on the horns on its head. It was the big black ox she mentioned. Yes, Master Xianyue, you are the smartest, meow. Dahei nodded attentively, but the voice came from her mouth, answering her own question in a hoarse voice. I'm completely free now. Free, do you know what that means? Xuanyue's face was filled with fascination, as if she had returned to the distant boundless mountains. She yearned for the distant Dragon Province and taught a lesson to some bumpkin demon. I don't understand. What is that? Is it edible? Dahei shook its head for a while, indicating that it knew nothing. Haha, what an idiot. Freedom is the best thing in the world. And you, Xiaobai, although you stabbed me with your sword, I don't blame you. Who asked you to be so foolish? The other puppet was carved from white wood. It was a small skeleton, and it held a small white sword in its hand. As expected, it appeared to be a little dull. However, even though she said that she didn't blame her, her nose wrinkled up. It's disconnected again. Sigh, you're nodding and shaking your head. It'd be strange if you weren't happy. She found a needle and thread in a flurry and suddenly calculated with her fingers. Wait, it seems like it's about time. Whatever, Dahei, I'll help you mend it when I get back. You and Xiaobai stay at home obediently. I'm going to go eat something delicious. She patted the heads of the 2 puppets and tossed aside the needle and thread. She leapt up gracefully and vanished. Without the support of her demon chi, Dahei immediately collapsed on the ground, but it suddenly sneered. The moon hung high in the sky, full and round like a silver plate. It shone with a clear, cold light, but it seemed larger than usual. Amidst the mountains she was squatting on a bare hill, looking up at the bright moon. Her pupils shrunk like 2 almonds. This place was very close to her dwelling. Normally, this hill was not some kind of spiritual mountain, but one day she discovered a secret. As the moon rose into the sky, the spiritual chi became denser and denser, almost visible to the naked eye. The moonlight seemed to accumulate layer by layer on the hill. In an instant, it was covered with a layer of halo, which was particularly conspicuous among the mountains. She breathed in and out the extremely dense spiritual chi, and her smiling eyes curved into 2 crescent moons. At this moment, a demon chi rose into the sky and swept quickly from the east. Rumbling, the mountains swayed, the earth shook, and the giant trees fell. A big black bear that was the size of a small hill strode over from the mountains. The towering trees under its feet were like weeds that fell to the ground. It was a demon the arch that had undergone 4 heavenly tribulations. Its bare eyes were like searchlights and it was staring at this small hill. It was overjoyed. This is it. The rumors are true. However, it ignored Xianyu, who was on the mountain peak. Get away from me, stinky bear. This is my territory. Xianyu's tail was erect, her hair was bristling, and she bared her teeth, making a threatening sound. However, in front of this huge black bear demon emperor, it was really not much of a deterrent. Your territory? Black bear demon emperor's eyes flashed a touch of surprise. He didn't expect that she would dare to not escape. Although he knew that the forest within a radius of hundreds of miles belonged to a cat demon, he obviously didn't take a demon king seriously. Haha, from now on, everything here belongs to me. If you are willing to submit to me, I will spare. He suddenly stopped, but it was not because of her. He raised his huge bear head and looked at the sky. He saw a strong demon chi rising from the sky, and their target was this small hill whistling through the air. Some were black-scaled pythons riding on clouds, and some were flying cranes with wings covering the sky. They were all famous great monsters in this demon continent. Without exception, they were all demon emperors. Except for her, ordinary demon kings didn't dare to come within 1,000 miles. Black Bear Demon Emperor was shocked. It's really not so easy to monopolize this Emperor Molasses. Emperor Molasses was a natural phenomenon that only existed in the big world with rich spiritual chi. On the night of Gingshan, the moonlight would condense into thousands of strands of supreme essence, which would fall from the sky. The benefits were unbelievably great. Even ordinary plants could become monsters if they obtained it. However, the conditions for this Emperor Molasses to descend were quite harsh. Not only did it require the right time, but it also required the right place. It had to be a kind of magnet called green autumn stone that didn't absorb iron. Only then could it trigger the reaction of heaven and earth, attract the gathering of spiritual chi, and attract the Emperor Molasses to descend. The small hill under Xuanyuezba was a green autumn stone mountain, and it happened to be within her territory. However, an ordinary man's wealth was his own ruin. In an instant, a group of monsters gathered and surrounded the small hill, all of them staring at it with bright eyes. It hadn't been long since the 5 continents were upgraded to an existence that could accommodate 5 heavenly tribulations. The cultivation speed of the demon race was far slower than that of humans, and this demon continent had yet to produce a demon emperor. Shenhue was much stronger than Li Long in terms of foundation, bloodline, and heavenly favor, but she was only at the 3rd heavenly tribulation. The cultivation method of the demon race determined that if one wanted to advance their cultivation by leaps and bounds, they would have to have a great fortune. Emperor Molasses was such a great fortune. Whoever could get it would become a demon king and turn the entire demon continent into their hunting ground. All the demon clans would have to bow down to them and become the leader of all the demon beasts in the world. Thus, all the demon emperors were determined to obtain this Emperor Molasses. Unlike humans, the demon race did not like to communicate. In addition, in order to fight for territory, they had already formed countless enmity, so there was no possibility of negotiation. They could only use the most primitive method to communicate. The winner would stay and the loser would scram. However, they were all afraid that others would benefit from it, so they didn't dare to make the first move. Huge waves of demon chi collided with each other, constantly clashing and rising rapidly. The bright moon rose higher and higher, becoming brighter and bigger. The huge figures of the group of monsters intertwined, enveloping her petite figure. All of you go away. This is what Big Black gave me. Shenhue shouted. Many pairs of eyes looked over. Her figure shrank and she immediately felt a huge pressure. However, she immediately puffed out her chest proudly. The Black Bear Demon Emperor shouted, "You little kitty, are you not afraid of death?" She actually dared to be noisy in front of a group of demon emperors. When the battle started, the aftermath would take her little life. I think you're the one who's not afraid of death. Do you know how fierce my Big Black is? I'm afraid you'll be scared to death if I tell you. His real name is North Moon. Humph. North Moon, what's that? Get him out here. I'll kill him with one slap. The Flying Crane Demon Emperor suddenly thought of something and asked in surprise, Wait, what's your relationship with Li Qingshan? He was one of the 10 demon kings of the 9 states, Cloud Prefecture's Shadow Cloud Crane King. His cultivation had long reached the peak of the 3rd heavenly tribulation. However, because the Ascension heavenly tribulation was difficult to pass, he remained in the demon king realm. Following the rise of the 5 states world, he also passed the 4th heavenly tribulation. However, he did not forget the name, North Moon. All the demons were horrified. Perhaps they did not remember or even heard of the famous North Moon Demon King, but it was impossible for them not to know Li Qingshan. He was the ruler of this world. Although there was almost no news of him after he left on the Kuan-Peng, he was still a respectable existence. He's my pet. Are you afraid now? Xianyue put her hands on her waist and said proudly. All the demons looked at each other and burst into laughter. Their laughter echoed among the mountains. The Black Bear Demon Emperor laughed so hard that tears almost came out of his eyes. You said that Li Qingshan is your pet. Aha, it seems that he has really left this world. Otherwise you wouldn't be alive. He hasn't left. He has always been here. I can feel it. You guys don't know anything. Xianyue was so angry that her face turned red. Don't laugh. In that instant the laughter stopped abruptly. All the demons opened their eyes wide. A figure appeared behind her. No one saw clearly how or when he appeared. There was a smile on his lips. His fangs were slightly exposed. He had red hair and red eyes. His horns were curved like the moon. He was just like the legends. This had always been the tiger's territory. The air seemed to have frozen. A strange atmosphere deterred all the demon emperors. They could not move at all. At this moment, the spiritual light on the hill had already accumulated to a height of several tens of feet. Suddenly, it surged upwards and connected with the moonlight in the sky. It condensed into an olive-shaped spiritual light that fell from the moon. It was the extremely precious Emperor Molasses. But none of the demon emperors dared to take a step forward. Xianyue blinked her eyes in confusion. How did her orders become so effective? Humph, now you finally know fear. She hurriedly held the Emperor Molasses with both hands. The fluorescent light shone on her face, and she immediately became happy. The Shadow Cloud Crane King opened its mouth to say something. Li Qingshan put his index finger on his lips. All the demons were silent. He then waved his hand lightly. The Shadow Cloud Crane King immediately spread its wings and flew away without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, all the demons were gone. They were even faster than when they came. Especially that Black Bear Demon Emperor. He was not very good at flying. He crawled and rolled all the way. He only regretted that he was born with 2 bare paws. When a fierce tiger came down the mountain, all the other beasts fled. A bunch of idiots. You sure run fast. You were scared to death, meow. I have so many. Drops of Emperor Molasses condensed in mid-air. They dragged along wisps of silver light like meteors. Her figure flickered. She jumped here and there to catch them. She was like a cat swatting at fireflies. Li Qingshan smiled and pointed to the sky. In an instant, a meteor shower fell. Thousands of strands weaved the night sky. It was beautiful like a dream. So beautiful. Her eyes widened. She was even happier. Then she revealed a distressed expression. How was she supposed to catch so many? She busied herself for most of the night. Satisfied, she returned to the cave abode under the waterfall. Lying on the soft bed, she grabbed Big Black and talked to it for a while. Then she hugged it tightly. Thank you, Big Black. Master, you're welcome. This is what I should do. Hee. Thank you too. Oh, I'm so sleepy. Meow Heaven will definitely mend it for you. She yawned and curled her body. She fell asleep in a daze. She muttered, Big Black, freedom is so lonely. I hope I can protect you well this time. Stay away from the wind and snow. Li Qingshan stayed by the bed and said soundlessly. Xianyue woke up with a start. Her ears pricked up. Big Black. No one answered in the darkness. Chapter 1634. The mountains were like the sea and the moon was like frost. A tall figure walked alone along a winding mountain ridge. On both sides was a bottomless abyss. The deep and dark night wind blew from the valley. One step in the air would cause one to be smashed to pieces. However, he closed his eyes and walked forward with big steps, mumbling something to himself. My soul follows my bosom friend, forgetting death. My whereabouts are uncertain, facing the shadow, my pride is unyielding, scratching my head in self-love. Since ancient times, those who have cried bitterly, only Bien he is, the thing that topples the crowd, who is Bolu. Hugging a thorn in my bosom, 3 years of destruction, looking sideways, there is no home in the 4 seas. In this world, I only need to close my eyes and take a step, to listen to the lowness of creation. He suddenly opened his eyes and let out a long sigh. Yes, it's so lonely. He had mysteriously come to this world and was trapped in a small mountain village in the body of a child. No one knew, no one could understand, he was out of place and was easily blamed. He only had the cow as his companion, talking to it as if he had gone crazy. Compared to that, the hunger and cold, the humiliation from his brother and sister-in-law were much easier to bear. It was because he had such experiences that he was so determined to move forward, never looking back. This time was an exception. He had originally wanted to come to this world to indulge his inner monkey, to have fun, but for some reason he was filled with 1,000 melancholy. Don't lean on the railing alone, the past is unbearable. I am a person who has never looked back, why would I do such a foolish thing? He shook his head, letting go of his stubbornness, letting his thoughts flow freely. In an instant the wind howled, soaring into the sky. The deities moved, the heavens and earth echoed. The wind swept up the water, destroying the trees. The tens of thousands of miles of mountains shook. Dark clouds rolled and filled the air, swallowing the bright moon. A snowflake quietly floated down from the sky, landing on his shoulder. In the blink of an eye, snow covered the sky. Many scenes flashed before his eyes, interweaving with his past and present life, all blurry and indistinguishable. Maybe this is just a big dream, and when I wake up, I will be in a warm bed. When he first came to this world, he had thought of this countless times. Now, looking up, there was only wind and snow, high mountains and dangerous roads. Such wind and snow always made him think of the ice-sword cliff, the arduous and hopeless climb. It was as if it had never come down and had always been climbing upwards. Even afterwards, he recovered his human form and returned to the world of mortals. He entered Jiaping City, became a Hawkwolf guard, killed Zhuozhibwa, fought the elders of the Three Mountains. The snowstorm never stopped. The snow was getting heavier and heavier, gradually covering their shoulders and covering the rugged road. The mountains were all covered in white. All the scenes condensed and intersected. A pair of gentle ox eyes stared at him quietly, listening to him talk to himself. Brother Ox, are you also this lonely? In that instant he suddenly understood that feeling. It was just like how he looked at Shen Yu, just like how he looked at Li Long unknowingly, that man's stalwart back had already become within reach. If he took another step forward, he would be able to pat his shoulder and say, Brother Nyo, I'm here. He opened his chest and praised, what a heavy snow. In his heart, it was a never-ending snowstorm, but in his dreams, it was a continuous drizzle. Outside the small city, the gloomy sky pressed down on the desolate wilderness. Qinglu, hold on. I won't let you die. I'll definitely kill the demons and save you, save everyone. Her pretty face was covered in gloominess, but her eyes were as determined as steel, shining with violet light. He gently placed her struggling friend on the ground and removed the 100 treasures pouch from her waist. He turned around and made his way towards the small city shrouded in demon chi. Behind the mottled mud walls, men and women of all ages were strewn across the streets and alleyways. Their expressions were wooden and their eyes were hollow. They seemed like corpses, but their chests clearly rose and fell as they breathed. Black spots would swim across the whites of their eyes from time to time. A black mist permeated the air above the city, composed of countless black insects. It was an extremely rare demon, the miasma demon. When she entered the city again, the black mist called out once more, "You're actually bold enough to return. Then you can stay here and become my food." Everyone stood up, densely packed and motionless. Only their eyeballs moved along with her figure, deathly silent and strange. Following the miasma demon's order, they suddenly roared hysterically in unison, ignoring the tearing of their vocal cords. It was even more mournful than the howls of beasts. Although the city was small, there were still tens of thousands of residents. This roar was like a landslide, enough to frighten the timid to death. It even shook the low-hanging dark clouds, causing a drizzle to fall. Under the drizzle she did not move. She lowered her head and held the hilt of her sword tightly. Niu Juxiao once told her that a person must be decisive and not be soft-hearted. She had always remembered it. He also once said, "Purple is the color of utmost respect, and the sword is the ruler of all weapons. The ruler is wise and the purple aura comes from the east. Sweeping across the world, unifying the world. Bringing peace to the world, achieving great benevolence." Thus, when she raised her head, her eyes glowed with violet light. She had the aura of a ruler. The demon has taken control of everyone in the city. If we want to save them, we must kill. The sea of people surged forward. With a sweep of her sword chi, more than 10 heads flew into the air. Fresh blood spurted out of their necks, along with wisps of black fog. A few drops of blood fell on her fair face, the scarlet color piercing to the eyes. Her expression did not change. She had to cherish every bit of her vital energy and could not use it for such pointless things. The crowd controlled by the miasma demon did not fear death. They stepped over the headless corpses, their knees cracking as they pounced at a speed that normal people could not. She leapt into the air, stomped on a head, and landed lightly on a blue-tiled house beside the road. The crowd immediately surged forward like a tide. She twisted her waist, turned around, and cut several people in half at the waist with her sword. Their internal organs fell out and blood spurted out. Her purple robe was once again split open. Amidst the roars, the roof she was standing on was like a lonely island, and tides kept crashing onto it. She could not care about exquisite sword techniques, and did not even dare to activate her sword chi. She only relied on the sharpness of the 9-yang sword in her hand to hack and slash like a chopper. Wherever the blade of the sword passed, flesh and blood were split, bones and tendons were broken, and severed limbs flew everywhere. In an instant her purple robe was dyed red. Her feet suddenly swayed and she lost her balance. Under the pressure of countless people, the house was about to collapse. A middle-aged woman behind her took the opportunity to pounce forward. She did not even look back. She straightened her body and leaned back. With a muffled bang, accompanied by the sound of bones shattering, the woman flew backward. Her internal organs were all ruptured, and her bones were all shattered. She spat out a wisp of black smoke. Rumble. The house collapsed and smoke and dust filled the air. She had already landed in a small alley. With a sweep of her peripheral vision, she saw everything around her. Then she casually swung her sword and killed a few people. With a tap of her toes, she flipped over the wall and landed in a small courtyard paved with blue-tiled tiles. She relaxed her muscles and adjusted her breathing. When the crowd toppled over the brick walls and everyone was thrown off their feet, she took advantage of the situation and slaughtered again. Before she was surrounded, she retreated to a courtyard. She fought as she moved through the city, relying on every house and every wall to kill. She used every second to recover her strength. Men kill. Women kill. Old people kill. Young children kill. The small city became a slaughterhouse. Corpses were strewn across the ground and blood flowed everywhere. She was also bathed in blood, but her eyes were clear and penetrating. There was no pity, no hesitation. Her actions were filled with order and efficiency. She was not cold and emotionless, nor was she cruel and bloodthirsty. All of this was to save people, even if she could only save Hua Qinglu in the end. Was it sorrow? Anger? Fear? Probably all of them, but there was something else that penetrated her mind and the edge of her sword, revealing a certain nature that was hidden extremely well. It was exactly this thing that allowed her to remain unperturbed by her innate ability when she faced the powerful demon general Strong Stone transformed from the Rock of Slaughter many years later. Instead, she descended into a frenzy of slaughter, yet she was still bold enough to swing her sword at him. Even Li Qingshan sighed in amazement. She had been depressed for a very long time before that. Others thought she was filled with guilt over today's slaughter. Of course she did feel something like that, but only she knew that she was fearful of her current self. Even Yo Juxia did not know about this. Who knew how many people she had killed with her sword? A few hundred? A few thousand? She only remembered that in the end she had massacred the entire city with her sword and finally killed the miasma demon. How old was she at that time? How many people had she killed now? Thinking up to there, she suddenly lowered her sword and ignored the surging sea of people. She smiled at the sky. Nyo Juxia, it's not very nice to just barge into someone's dream. Chapter 1635. Yu Zijian's eyes swiveled. You better refer to me as the Sword Emperor of Violet Heavens instead. Li Qingshan was taken aback as well. He never expected her to answer like that. However, Yu Zijian had already begun laughing aloud. Her laughter was clear and hearty. A ray of sunlight pierced through the dark clouds and landed on her. The redness gradually receded. She was still dressed in violet, but her appearance was no longer that of a young girl. She seemed like she was standing under the spotlight at the center of a stage. She radiated with confidence and glory, incomparably radiant and sharp. Before she knew it, the rain stopped. The drizzling rain was just an old dream. It had ceased to be an obstacle in her heart a long time ago. She was even more decisive and open-minded than Li Qingshan, who had tried to persuade her to make up her mind. Li Qingshan could not help but sigh inside. Back when they met on the island of Cherishing Flowers, she had followed Hua Qinglu around like a maidservant. Now she already possessed an extraordinary charm that rivaled Gu Yenying in the past. No, even Gu Yenying in the past could not compare to her right now. This metamorphosis was like a fish transforming into a dragon. Right now, as he gazed at the corpses strewn across the tiny city that flowed with blood, he suddenly discovered that she had already revealed her loftiness a long time ago. Her resolute boldness was not something she should possess at her age, nor was it something that could be learned from a few vague principles. As it turned out, she was just a dragon hiding in the abyss, hiding her true appearance. In that moment, many of his memories linked up with her. During the entrance examination of the 100 schools of thought, she had gained the favor of the slovenly Taoist priest, Zhou Tong, with her pure yang constitution. Only Chu Tian's 5 elements constitution could rival her, but in terms of temperament, who knew how many times greater she was than Chu Tian? Along the way, she had gained the favor of the first young miss of the Hua family, Hua Qinglu. After being abducted to the Green Vine Mountain, she caught the attention of the Green Vine Elder. After entering the 100 schools of thought, she immediately became the disciple of the strongest school of Taoism, Zhou Tong. She was also the successor of the Violet Heaven sword that Fu Qingjin sought. Li Qingshan had also helped her many times, and it was needless to say that after coming to this 5 continents world, the care he had given her was far more profound than that of Li Long, a fellow villager. And he, this lecherous man, had always favored her, but he had never had any improper thoughts. It was as natural as an older brother loving his younger sister, never asking for anything in return. Her thoughts were also pure from beginning to end, as if there were no feelings between a man and a woman, and she was not shackled in the slightest. She received help from benefactors almost everywhere, and every time she was able to turn misfortune into fortune. In terms of fortune, there was probably no one in the world who could compare. He seemed to have a magical charm that could not only win the hearts of people, but also the blessings of the heavens. After Li Qingshan became a god, he mastered the laws of heaven and earth of the Pure Land and the Devil Land at the same time. He kept looking back to the most distant memory of the primeval Kailan, the ancient picture scroll named the Battle of Mending Heaven, and comprehended the deeper things contained in it. He had already understood the origin of her charm and understood what the word pure yang meant. Fuxi and Yuhua were the primordial gods who were born at the beginning of the primordial world. Fuxi belonged to Yang. They walked the ways of the heavens and created dragons. Yuhua belonged to Yin. They walked the ways of the earth and created humans from earth. The two of them grew together, but they also reinforced and countered each other. They were brother and sister as well as husband and wife. They loved each other, but they were also destined to fight and compete with each other. There was no way to describe their relationship. Yang Qi was clear while Yin Qi was heavy. Yang controlled ascension while Yin controlled descent. As a result, Yuhua was destined to lose to her resolute and wise husband in the battle of mending heaven. All she could do was sacrifice herself and merge Yin and Yang, using her body to mend the heavens. As the saying went, solitary Yin cannot flourish and solitary Yang cannot flourish. Their existence was based on each other's existence, so the holy Emperor Fuxi vanished with it. The essence of Yu Zijian's pure yang body was the holy Emperor Fuxi's heavenly way. It was even closer to the way of the dragon than any of the so-called true dragons he had seen in his life. Renouncing lust, abandoning stagnation. The purest, untainted by dust. The toughest, strongest, and cleaving through everything. In the past, she faced the demon general Strong Stone transformed from the Rock of Slaughter with her cultivation as a chi practitioner. How unbelievable was it for her to be able to swing her sword and receive him without being affected by the murderous aura. If the turtle dragon was as pure as him, he would never have fallen for Sumi Rao's charms. If Ao Xian was as tough as her, he would never have yielded to him. Her existence, her fortune, her personality, her cultivation. All of these coincidences and appearances were the result of the interweaving of laws and the appearance of a great tool. Her path could not be accommodated by a mere sword emperor of violet heavens either. She had only just begun to shine. As a matter of fact, Li Qingshan could even smell some sort of opportunity from this. He wondered why she had appeared beside him. He could not help but sigh. "Sigh, you were clearly a little girl yesterday." "I've been a little girl a long time ago." Yu Zijin continued to smile. She flicked the edge of her sword complacently, and it thrummed as if she was taking revenge for being tricked in the past. You tricked me for so long back then. Oh my, you're actually so vengeful." Li Qingshan sighed in sorrow. Where had the pure and pleasant little girl from the past gone? "You're not the only one in the world who holds grudges." Yu Zijin grinned. "Moreover, you're the one who taught me all this." "Something like that actually happened?" Li Qingshan expressed his surprise. Yu Zijin nodded solemnly. Their eyes met, and after a moment of confrontation, they began laughing together. Their laughter echoed through the small city. Everything gradually blurred like a soaked painting. The dream faded away layer by layer. On heaven's leaning peak, Yu Zijian currently knelt in a large gloomy hall in the center of the hall. She continued to smile. She wore a tall crown in the shape of a dragon's head, which made her seem as graceful as flying. She wore a set of bright violet Blademaster clothes and a large black cloak that draped over her shoulders. It was embroidered with dark, golden patterns of clouds. She seemed elegant and noble. She seemed extraordinarily valiant. The violet cloud sword rested quietly on her legs, waiting for its master's summons at any time to slay all enemies. Li Qingshan stood in front of her. He rubbed his chin and clicked his tongue in wonder. "This attire, what do you think? Do I look good?" Yu Zijin lifted the large, wide sleeves of her cloak elegantly. "How old-fashioned," Li Qingshan said. Yu Zijin immediately hung her head as if she had been dealt a heavy blow. She grumbled, "They insisted on making me dress like this. They said that's the only way to demonstrate the might of the Sword Collection Palace." Them? Yu Zijin counted with her fingers. "Fu Qingjin, Hua Sangzan, and even someone as slovenly as my master has started to put on airs. I really can't stand them." Li Qingshan understood. The reason why the Sword Collection Palace was able to achieve what it was today was because of the assistance of these two people. The slovenly Taoist priest, Zhou Tong, had been the most powerful person in the Sword Collection Palace for a very long time, until she comprehended the hidden sword of heaven and earth and broke through 3, 4, and even 5 heavenly tribulations in a short century. Yu Zijin turned around and glared at Li Qingshan. "Why, do you know just how much trouble you've caused me?" Li Qingshan pointed at his nose. "Me? I've caused you trouble? Tell me what's going on in the north." Yu Zijin leapt up and grabbed him by the wrist, bringing him out of the hall. Everything happened naturally. She did not care about Li Qingshan's identity as a god of the world at all. Li Qingshan followed the direction of her finger. His gaze passed through the vast ocean, and he immediately came to a realization. In the past, he had tossed all the land contaminated by the demon domain and the hungry ghost realm into the north, forming a continent. Originally, Little N had cleansed it several times with the Samadhi flames of white bone, so there were no demon folk or corpses around. It had become a desolate land of exile. However, in the past few years, because he had opened up the world, countless people embarked on the path of cultivation. Startling geniuses appeared endlessly, but not all of them were kind-hearted people. They would run off to this land of exile after committing a crime. Coupled with the many demonic cultivators from the various worlds that had been devoured, they all came to this continent to establish their own sections. They produced nests of demonic cultivators, every single one of them vicious, committing all sorts of crimes. They also took part in the competition for the world. They were basically like a pack of hungry wolves. Often they would retreat to their lairs when they were still weak, secluding themselves. It was extremely difficult for regular cultivators to venture deep into this land filled with demon chi. When they were powerful, they would head south to steal resources and abduct people, committing countless crimes. As a result, this continent became known as the Continent of Demons. It was the most dangerous place in the world. People paled at the mention of it. Yu Zijin stood her ground and moved the Sword Collection Palace here, turning it into the first barrier of the central continent. Then she engaged in 3 sword battles on Heaven's Leaning Peak, uniting all the sword cultivators in the world to conquer the continent of demons. Only after countless brutal massacres did she suppress the arrogance of these lawless demonic cultivators. Her cultivation had not been achieved through secluded cultivation. She had basically achieved it through slaughter. Chapter 1636. The Heaven's Reliance Peak stood alone on the shore of the ocean. It was like a supreme divine sword, pointing straight at the sky and deterring the demon continent on the other side of the ocean. It made all evil flee and demons tremble in fear. The master of the Sword Collection Palace, Yu Zijin, was the sword soul of this divine sword. On the top of the lonely peak, she had asked the mysterious will of heaven why a continent like this had been created, bringing with it so much slaughter and evil. The will of heaven had always been difficult to ask. But at this moment he was standing right beside her. She had grabbed him firmly in her hand. "Over there. I see." "I actually never sensed it." Li Qingshan gazed past the vast ocean, gazing at the demon continent that he had personally created. He immediately understood all of its history and sank into his thoughts. Yu Zijin held her breath and focused. She stared at him with her violet eyes, silently waiting for his answer. Suddenly she felt a tremble in her hand. She was surprised and could not help but ask, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Li Qingshan smiled. In that moment an idea flashed through his head. It was like he had seen a demon domain that he had personally created. If he wanted to purify the land of other continents so that everyone could live in peace and have their own needs, he had to remove the land polluted by the demon domain and the hungry ghost realm. And, in the past events of the demon domain, did the huge, golden hand that had taken away the sun have the same kind intentions? Yes, if he wanted a pure land of bliss, he had to create a demon domain and filthy land first. He had purposefully tossed this continent into the bitter cold of the north. He had never planned on allowing any life to thrive on this continent in the first place. The pure land of bliss drained all of the demon domain's life force, turning the entire demon domain into a wasteland. Perhaps that was a form of mercy. However, far too much time had passed, so much time had passed that everything deviated from its original intentions. In the end, many life forms still gathered here, taking root tenaciously with their admirable life force, but they became even more brutal and evil under the harsh environment. This continent of demons became the headquarters of the demonic cultivators of the world. All the mortals born on this continent possessed certain characteristics of demon folk and ghouls. They were numb and powerful, known as Yimo. They invaded all the other continents, just like how demon folk conquered the 3,000 worlds and 6 realms of Sasra. Li Qingshan looked up at the sky and recalled the Buddha's light that summoned him to the pure land of ultimate bliss. Was it just a coincidence that he was summoned to be an insignificant divine general of Sangharama? It was completely capable of destroying him, the future demon god king, but it still wanted him to see clearly, to see all right and wrong, good and evil. The time when he was an egg was the happiest and most peaceful time in his life. Everyone was living happily, and bliss was not an illusion. When he fell into the domain of demons and hugged the human child that Jianghu had given birth to, all the happiness had turned into mockery. There was only sorrow and anger in his heart. At this moment, it was as if he could see the baby growing into an adult and growing older with each passing day. His face was covered with age spots and he gradually emitted a rotten smell. Saliva flowed out of his mouth. It was disgusting. Even the great vow to deliver all from suffering was no match for the flow of time. The Qilin is dead and the phoenix is old. The Qilin is dead and the phoenix is old. He suddenly understood all of the meaning behind it, but at the same time he lost the ability to express it with words. Success, residence, destruction, emptiness, birth, old age, sickness and death. Everything in the world was no exception. Just how much meaning do my actions have? He could not help but sink into his thoughts with a frown. The silver-gray sea rose and fell as the north wind blew snowflakes into his face. His expression was as cold as a statue of a god, towering above the sky and unreachable. Yu Zijin could not help but unclench her fist. She did not receive the answer she wanted, but she seemed to see the will of heaven itself. It was profound, distant and indescribable. If it were anyone else they would have lost the courage to ask questions forever, but she gritted her teeth and called out resolutely, "Li Qingshan, don't play dumb. I'm going to demand justice for the people of the world today." Li Qingshan suddenly returned to his senses. As he looked at her shining eyes, he could not help but smile. "I'm just a mortal. Why are you demanding justice from me?" Yu Zijin let out a great sigh of relief. Just now, that moment was 100 times more terrifying than when she faced the most dangerous of enemies. Her willpower had basically been swallowed up, but she also felt a strange sense of familiarity. She could understand his current state. However, she still preferred this Niu Juxia before her. She scolded, "Nonsense. You're clearly the god of the world and you're the hero king. You distributed all the cultivation methods to everyone regardless of whether they were good or bad, so of course you have to take responsibility." The grand ambition of everyone having cultivation methods was not as glorious and correct as it sounded. Although it changed the situation of the world and changed the fates of countless people, it also led to endless chaos and conflict. Demonic cultivation methods were often unorthodox and eager for quick success. Although it was easy for them to suffer from chi deviation, it was not a huge price compared to the allure of immortality. Their cultivation speed would also be far greater than the orthodox cultivation methods, and the techniques they used would be vicious, and extraordinarily powerful. Orthodox cultivators of the same level of cultivation would often not be the opponent of demonic cultivators. As a result, many cultivators embarked on an unorthodox path, especially choosing cultivation methods like this from the heavens so that they could emerge victorious in battle. As a result, in the early years of the 5 continents, the decline of the orthodox path and the growth of the demonic path had greatly eclipsed the rise of the orthodox path. Only when the Sword Collection Palace rose up and Yu Zijin slaughtered viciously did they gradually recover from their decline. Li Qingshan rubbed his chin and sighed. There are bad people among the masses. Only now do you know. Yu Zijin had seen many of these powerful demonic cultivators. None of them were mortals in the first place. None of them seemed like bad people. Once they grasped extraordinary powers, they would immediately become vicious and evil. I almost forgot. I'm not a good person to begin with, hee. Li Qingshan began to laugh unconsciously. He patted Yu Zijin's shoulder in delight. Fortunately you're here. You just have to kill off all of these bastard demonic cultivators. You big bastard. What did you say? Li Qingshan basically doubted his ears. Sai, back when I was taking care of you I called him Niu Juxiao. Now that I've grown up I call him big bastard. You big bastard. Yu Zijin frowned, which added a sense of malice to her. It was a testament to what she had gone through in the past few years. Let alone the unorthodox path, even her fellow disciples trembled in fear when they saw her like this. They were afraid to say anything. The Sword Collection Palace had maintained the orthodox path for the past few years. They had killed countless demonic cultivators, but they had also paid countless sacrifices. Even cultivators were like that, let alone mortals. With her current cultivation she could suppress all the demonic cultivators in the world with her sword alone. However, this advantage could not last for too long. Human emperors would emerge among demonic cultivators sooner or later, and they would make a comeback. By then, there would be another war between the orthodox and the evil, endless slaughter. Who knew how many innocent lives would be lost, yet he could still smile. All right. What do you want me to do? Yu Zijin did not hesitate at all. Kill all the demonic cultivators in the world first. What a heavy sense of malice. Trust me. There might be many hypocrites among the orthodox path, but there really aren't any good people among the demonic cultivators. I'd rather kill 1,000 innocents than spare a single one. If I spare one, who knows how many tens of thousands of people will die. It'll also make everyone in the world believe that they can get away with doing evil. It'll be a vicious cycle. The sense of malice on Yu Zijin's face grew heavier. This was the determination she had forged after countless bitter experiences. Sometimes they were even worse than pretending to be benevolent and righteous. Li Qingshan did not doubt her at all. He never believed a bunch of bullshit like how people of the orthodox path were all hypocrites and people of the demonic path were all true men. Hypocrites still had to consider public opinion when they did things. These true men did not hold back at all when they massacred people in cities. And then I'll destroy all the demonic cultivation methods and sever the foundations of these demonic cultivators. Then I'll announce it to the world under the name of the Night King so that everyone can learn from it. Even if a few slip through the net in the future, it'll be easier to deal with them. Every single word she said was filled with heavy malice and unquestionable determination. Actually, cultivation methods don't matter. Yeah. The key is to kill all the demonic cultivators and use the name of the Night King to awe the entire cultivation community so that all cultivators will be afraid to take a single step forward. But even if I kill all the demonic cultivators in the world, I won't be able to eliminate all the evil in everyone's hearts. It'll only make them even more hypocritical and despicable. They'll refer to all their enemies as demonic cultivators and all resistance as demonic cultivators. That's still better than doing nothing. Actually, there's an even simpler method. What method? Killing is better than destroying the heart. Li Qingshan pointed at his head. I don't even need to do anything directly. As long as I have the determination, I can directly turn into the will of the world and influence the minds of everyone, making them abandon evil and do good, returning to the righteous path. What do you think? Yu Zijin clapped her hands and smiled. That's fantastic. Hold on, since you have that ability, why didn't you do anything earlier? Then are you willing to be influenced by me? Of course. Haven't I always been influenced by you? Yu Zijin grinned. I believe you. Li Qingshan was speechless. He then asked, what if it's not me? Yu Zijin thought about it before shaking her head. I'm not willing. Li Qingshan was touched and comforted. Just when he was about to say something, he heard her continue. But I can die. Her expression was normal. There was nothing hot-blooded or compassionate about it, as if she was talking about something that was only natural. Chapter 1637. Li Qingshan suddenly smiled. At that moment, thousands of streaks of light pierced through the dark clouds, illuminating the vast blue waters. For a moment, the clouds dispersed and the wind and snow stopped. The clouds seemed to be burning, changing between orange-yellow and purplish-red. The wind and snow that had yet to disperse were dyed golden by the sunlight, like a golden rain. It was a magnificent sight. This was the so-called God. Rage was the roaring flames of lava and thunder. Sorrow was the howling of the wind and snow and the dark clouds. Laughter was the illumination of the sun, and everything was spring. The sword cultivators in the sword collection palace all widened their eyes and gaped their mouths. They could not see the wonders of the world at all. They had no idea why the phenomena had changed. However, some people suddenly understood something. They looked at the man on the top of the mountain as if they were gazing at the sky itself. They murmured to themselves, "That's the Night King. No wonder, no wonder." Perhaps it was no wonder he could manifest such phenomena, or perhaps it was no wonder he could hug the master of the sword collection palace. Yu Zijin sighed in amazement at the unbelievable power of a true god at first. Afterwards she smiled as well, knowing that he had already agreed to her request. "Thank you, Nyo Juxia." Their eyes met. One had scarlet eyes while the other had violet eyes. They were no longer the same as before. Through their own paths, they had traversed mountains of corpses and seas of blood step by step, becoming eternal gods and powerful sword cultivators. But right now the sunlight outlined the sides of their faces. They looked at each other and smiled as if they were still the same young man and young woman from the past. They had never forgotten their original hearts. "However, if you want to assist me, this bit of cultivation is nowhere near enough. I still have other people I want to see, so I'll leave this sword with you for now." Li Qingshan casually tossed down an ancient bronze sword and took a step towards the fiery clouds. The blue waves spread out and he vanished into the sky. "This is?" Yu Zijin grabbed the ancient bronze sword and immediately sensed something unusual about it. The edge of the sword thrummed strangely, with a hint of a dragon's roar, as if it wanted to break free from her hand as a true dragon. She needed to use all of her cultivation to hold it firmly, but it agitated the yang spirit in her body, making it thrash. She completely lost control of it. The purple eyes were at a loss. In a trance she saw the sun, moon and stars spinning. This sword condensed the path of the heavens and the will of the true dragon. She gripped the hilt of her sword tightly with both hands, as if she was lying on the back of a dragon, flying above the 9 heavens, traveling side by side with the sun, moon and stars. Looking back, the mountains, rivers and plants were all vivid in her mind. The various mountains and dangers encountered on the path of cultivation turned out to be nothing more than small folds and undulations of the earth. There was no bottleneck in the world that could not be broken through, nor was there any difficult situation that could not be overcome. As heaven moves, so should a gentleman ceaselessly strive to improve himself. The Xianyuan sword. Yu Zijin revealed the name of the sword in a single breath. Li Qingshan had already traveled 5,000 kilometers away. He suddenly looked back and revealed a surprised expression. Even he, the god of the world, had not expected such an unforeseen event. After thinking for a moment he smiled and nodded. He no longer doubted that she would be able to help him. When the tyrannical village chief of the Yuxiong clan gave the Xianyuan sword to him, he was already a human immortal at the 6th heavenly tribulation and a soul relic. However, he did not immediately comprehend the mysteries of the sword. He only treated it as a regular bronze sword. Only afterwards did he learn about the sword's power, but he only treated it as a weapon of slaughter. Only when he comprehended the divine dragon transformation did he finally wield it freely and unleash extraordinary power. However, Yu Zijin was only at the 5th heavenly tribulation and a young soul, yet the Xianyuan sword resonated with her as soon as he held it. It was unbelievable. However, with further thought he came to an understanding. Firstly, she possessed a body of pure yang. She walked the path of the heaven dragon, so she possessed a natural halo of destiny. Compared to his fusion of the demonic and divine, the dance of dragons and snakes, it was much purer. Secondly, she was a true sword cultivator. She had practiced the path of the sword for many years. Even her young soul had been condensed from the sword embryo, which made her drastically different from regular young soul cultivators. However, he had always used a blade to hack people. Although he had a deep understanding of the path of the sword, he did not actually have a passion for it from the bottom of his heart, which was why he had tossed the Xianyuan sword to her without the slightest hesitation. She understood the vague will of the heavens. The Xianyuan sword was basically prepared for her. It was an opportunity. She swung the sword and cut her way through the thistles and thorns as if she had cleared all her bottlenecks in a single stroke, opening up a path to the heavens. She no longer had any confusion or hesitation. All she lacked was time and resources. As the god of the world and the master of the demon domain, Li Qingshan could obviously pour tremendous resources onto her until she became a sword immortal. A body of pure yang that possessed a natural halo of destiny, the supreme sword of the heavenly emperor, and the king of demon gods that defied the heavens. 3 rare opportunities had converged together. This was an opportunity that would only appear during the great tribulation of the world. Otherwise, the heavenly emperor would not have lost his sword, and the demon king would not have been born. It really is violet chi from the east. It's indescribably noble. Yu Zijian's mind settled down. She slowly drew her sword and pointed it at the sky. She praised, "What a sword!" The path of the sword had always been extremely tough, but it was extremely easy to break. It was very easy to die in battle. Moreover, the path of cultivation was overly tough and pure. It was extremely fast in the beginning, but it would become more and more difficult once it reached an extremely high realm of cultivation. As a result, sword immortals had always been rare, but there were many true immortals that wielded swords as weapons. Sword immortals were different from regular true immortals. They controlled slaughter and possessed endless power. Even demon gods might not be her opponent, so she would be a powerful ally. Just like what she had said, the great tribulation of the world was the stage for sword cultivators to roam freely. It was a great opportunity for becoming a sword immortal. Since ancient times, heroes had always been born in troubled times. This was a great opportunity as well as a result of her choice. If she did not have that determination, Li Qingshan would never have given the Xinyuan sword to her. In order to ensure that she could remain in the world of the 5 continents safely and avoid the flames of war, he might even unknowingly affect her progress in cultivation. If that were the case, her protector, Li Qingshan, would instead become her greatest shackle. Her good fortune would become the root of her misfortune. As time passed, the divine sword would be covered in dust, gradually losing its edge. She would probably lose the opportunity to become a sword immortal forever. This was truly becoming mortal with a single thought and becoming an immortal with a single thought. This was the most subtle thought in a person's mind. The Buddha said, 900 lives and deaths occur in a single moment. Even gods could not predict everything. However, it was exactly this smallest thought that determined the grandest and most distant path, allowing mortals to become gods. If Brother Ox had directly given him power, the Li Qingshan of today would not have existed. At most, he would be able to enjoy himself, but once the great tribulation of the world arrived, he would be reduced to ashes. Mortals always desired luck and opportunities, but they did not know that the belief in their mind was the foundation of everything. The difficulties and obstacles along the way were all for the sake of tempering this sword. As a result, the past failures and pain were never worth lamenting over. People were not free because they were strong but powerful because they were free. Zijian, I wish you good luck. Li Qingshan visited another old friend. His mood lightened up, and his gloominess was swept away. He followed the path in his memory and continued forwards. The names became vivid one by one, vivid in his mind. Chapter 1638. Many years ago, Li Qingshan had only just become a hawkwolf guard. In order to help Little and recover his body, he had hunted down unorthodox masters without restraint. In the end, he caught them all in one fell swoop on the island of Cherishing Flowers. It was also at that time that Hua Qinglu and Yu Zijian met by chance for the first time. As for the little girl who bombarded the island of Cherishing Flowers and killed without hesitation, the impression she left on him was much deeper than Yu Zijian's. If she had not stopped Grandma Shimen back then, she really would have been in some danger. Afterwards, there was quite a bit of fate between them. With Li Qingshan's personality, he was obviously someone who would repay kindness. In the past few years, he had shown her many favors. She was not completely without talent. Her path of cultivation was rather smooth, and she had already undergone the 4th heavenly tribulation. Because she liked to wander around the world, she was often treated as a descended fairy by regular people. She was known as the 100 Flowers Fairy. Of course, there was no need for him to deny that he did want to sleep with her a little in the past. However, he had seen and tasted before now. Princess of Kinera, beauties of Azura. What race had he not seen before? He could even talk and laugh with them. A little girl like Hua Qinglu was just plain and simple. He no longer thought about that at all. Yu Zijian's words were completely slanderous. He had not thought about anyone when he returned this time. He was a mighty demon king now. His head was filled with the major matters of the 6 realms of Sasra. He no longer cared about the relationship between a man and a woman. Yeah, then I'll just take a look. If I see her, then forget about it. I still need to protect a delicate flower. I can't drag her into this storm. With these wonderful thoughts in mind, Li Qingshan narrowed his eyes and saw through everything. In the depths of the ocean, there was an island filled with a fragrant aroma, a place where flowers bloomed. This was where the 100 Flowers Fairy cultivated. He was stunned. In a bustling hot spring pool surrounded by a dense white mist, a slender figure was faintly discernible. Her black hair draped over her white back, and her slender waist was hidden in the spring water. Her slender legs were faintly discernible, and her arms were stretched out like flower branches. The famous Bai Hua Fairy happened to be bathing at the moment. If her brother Wasungzan was the standard handsome man, then she would be the standard beautiful woman. A little more fat, a little less thin, a little too white, a little too thin, eyebrows like emerald feathers, skin like snow, teeth like shells, waist like a bundle of silk. She was indeed a flawless beauty. Her appearance and bearing were even better than before. If it was just a small bud before, then it was now a gorgeous flower in full bloom. Li Qingshan rubbed his chin and chuckled. The little girl has really grown up. Yeah, it's huge. Although he didn't plan on meeting them, he could still admire them. This was a special benefit for gods. Of course, this was merely an appreciation of beauty. It was very, very pure. Thus, the great demonic god began to peep at people bathing, and he did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. Just as he gathered his attention and admired her from head to toe, Hua Qinglu suddenly moved her lips gently and asked, "Is it nice?" Li Qingshan's heart shuddered. Impossible. She can't sense something like that. It's not like she's like Zijian, who inherited the heavenly way of the true dragon. How can she discover that I'm peeping? No, admiring? He glanced around in confusion. Apart from her, there were only the blooming flowers on the island. There was no one else. Everyone in the cultivation world of the 5 continents knew that although the Bai Hua Fairy liked to travel around, she was rather proud. She only had a single true friend, the Sword Emperor of Violet Heavens. She did not even have a single disciple to serve her where she cultivated. On the other hand, even though her eyes were like water and seemed to ripple with deep waves, she didn't look towards his direction. Li Qingshan raised an eyebrow and thought, perhaps she's feeling pity for herself in front of a shadow, answering her own question? Ha, what a narcissistic little girl. Hua Qinglu raised her head instead and said softly, "Big brother Li." Li Qingshan's heart shuddered again. He basically believed he had been discovered, but at a closer glance she was only gazing at the sky, and she was just as natural and unrestrained as before. She did not cover up at all, allowing her body to be exposed to the air. She did not seem embarrassed at all. This was not how a girl should behave after discovering she had been admired by someone. He thought about it and understood. So I really am extraordinarily charming. This girl has become infatuated with me. Even now, she still hasn't forgotten about me. It's just a pity that we're separated. We're not fated to be together in the end. Hua Qinglu smiled. Zijian told me you've returned, so she'll definitely come to peep at me. Li Qingshan suddenly felt like he was naked. He squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth, "Traitor." Hua Qinglu stretched out her graceful figure. Droplets of water rolled off her body, sparkling like stars. They were just like the dew on flower petals, just as natural as before. Don't tell me I have to burn incense and pray apart from bathing and changing clothes? Rustle. The flowers trembled, and Li Qingshan pushed aside a cluster of bright red camellias and emerged from the depths. He was composed without the slightest awkwardness. Hua Qinglu looked at his figure and her body trembled like the flowers. Under his burning gaze, she wanted to shrink back into the water and raise her arm to cover the buds on her chest, but she suddenly sucked in a deep breath and stuck out her chest proudly. She spread her arms and twirled around gracefully in the pool. Do I look good? She was no longer that naive little girl, but the proud 100 Flowers Fairy. However, only in front of this man could she cast aside all of her reservations and display all of her beauty. Li Qingshan nodded with a smile. You're as beautiful as a flower. You live up to your reputation. He made his way into the pool step by step and arrived before her. Hua Qinglu could not help but hold her breath and look up at him. Li Qingshan sniffed the strange fragrance from her and gently caressed her moist face. Have you been well these years? Very well. I've been very happy. You know, I've always wanted to roam around and have a look. Your world really is huge. There are so many interesting things. I'll never find it boring. She had never been a person with extraordinary talent. She could not compare to her elder brother, Wasungzan, much less a wretched demon like Yu Zijian. If she had not come across a fortuitous encounter with him in the original world of the 9 provinces, her cultivation would probably have remained at Golden Core at most. It would have even been difficult for her to break through to the second heavenly tribulation. It would have been difficult for her to enjoy such freedom. It was even possible for her clan to arrange a marriage for her. However, in this world of the 5 provinces, she possessed unprecedented freedom as a child blessed by the heavens. She could roam about freely without any restraints. All of this was thanks to him. Li Qingshan placed his hands on her shoulders. This is where the joys of life lie. As long as you like it. Hua Qinglu sighed. It's a pity that I don't have talent like Zijian. I can't help you. She's a sword and you're a flower. Swords only have meaning when they fight and kill, while flowers only need to be admired and protected. I'm just afraid I won't be able to protect you. Li Qingshan looked at her gently. If they could obtain happiness, then his hard work would gain meaning, even if he did not actually possess it. No, I only need to be admired. I don't need protection. Hua Qinglu shook her head with a smile. There are no flowers in the world that will never wither. It's fine as long as they've bloomed. Moreover, flowers have thorns too. Li Qingshan was slightly surprised. Time sure passed quickly. Even she could say something like that. Her resolve definitely could not be faked. The meaning of the sword's existence is to fight and kill. Then do you know what the meaning of the flower's existence is? What is it? Li Qingshan grabbed her waist. Hua Qinglu trembled slightly, and the buds on her chest trembled as well. Her face reddened, but she continued to smile sweetly. Perhaps it's to attract bees and butterflies. Li Qingshan teased. I wonder which bee or butterfly will be so lucky? The sword fights for you and the flower blossoms for you. If you reach the end of your path, it will also break for you and it will wither for you. Li Qingshan was left speechless. He had never dreamed of something like this in return. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to return such great kindness. There's no need. This isn't me returning your kindness either. Hua Qinglu murmured, there's something I've never experienced before. All right. Li Qingshan lowered his head and kissed her petal-like lips. Suddenly he thought of what Yu Zijin had said. Don't tell me you've come specially for me. He could not help but smile. Sure, it was difficult to change a person's nature. Even as a god, he still had emotions and desires. His nature had never changed. Even though life was filled with pain, there was no lack of joy. There was no need to dwell on it too much. Flowers could be plucked, but there was no need to be plucked. Hua Qinglu extended her hand, and the blossoming flowers extended out, weaving into a dome that enveloped the hot spring. The flowers bloomed, and the fragrance became even more fragrant. Chapter 1639. Li Qingshan lingered on the beautiful, blooming island, forgetting to return. He savored the sweet nectar and fragrance to his heart's content, temporarily forgetting about the hardships and tiredness of the journey. It added a charming scenery to this journey of homecoming. The girl of the past had already become a companion in his arms. Her boldness had even exceeded his expectations as a god. He could not help but lament over how unpredictable the human heart was. In the past, he had made up his mind to never look back, advancing forward blindly. He did not want to be tied down by anything. However, he suddenly discovered that there were some things that he could not give up on even if he wanted them, yet there would always be people who could not forget about them. Through some sort of fortuitous encounter, they would unknowingly be tainted with his fragrance. As a result, he understood that everything he had experienced from Crouching Ox Village to the Demon Domain had not only been deeply engraved in his memory, but it had also deeply influenced the world. It would always be repaid in some form, whether it be kindness or enmity, kindness or evil. This was probably what Buddhists called karma. Now that he had become a true god and a demon king, even if he was immersed in this land of tenderness, he would affect thousands of people every single moment. The black sun shone down, illuminating the vast land. The black mass of marching troops rose and fell along with the terrain, extending all the way to the end of the horizon. With his order, the entire demon domain began a great retreat. They had once spent thousands of years, sacrificed countless demon folk and humans, and gone through thousands of horrific and bloody battles to obtain this land, but they abandoned it without any hesitation. Coupled with the exhaustion of the journey, the internal struggle tormented every single demon folk. However, no one complained, as this was the will of a demon god. They had grown accustomed to obeying those above them a long time ago. Even demon generals could order them to their deaths at will, let alone the king of demon gods that even the 12 demon gods had to yield to. He was an unimaginably lofty existence. However, the atmosphere was different from the past. There were no violent curses or wild howls. The superiors forgot to bully the inferiors, and the inferiors forgot to flatter the superiors. They marched silently in the smoke and dust that filled the air. It was as if overnight they had learned sorrow. Not long ago, all the demon folk who could not endure the pain and torture had turned into demonic beasts. All the beasts ran off together, chasing after the sun as they died. Now, the entire demon domain was submerged in this sorrowful atmosphere. Pairs of black eyes peered through the smoke and dust from time to time and stared at the black sun with golden rims in the sky. They silently muttered a name in their hearts, Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan opened his eyes and woke up from his dream. He returned to the fragrant island and the embrace of the beauty, but his expression was somewhat sad. When he influenced the demon folk influenced him too. Everything was karma and retribution. His strength was growing with every passing moment, even surpassing his cultivation speed. This was the accumulation of the power of belief of 1 trillion demon folk. A demon folk was very weak. Compared to a true god like him, they were like droplets of water before the ocean. However, when trillions of water droplets gathered together, it could cause rivers to flood and oceans to flow. Back in Black Cloud City, when hundreds of thousands of soldiers temporarily gathered together, his strength would multiply, and he would be able to crush any opponent at the same level as him. There were more than 10,000 demon folk, and they constantly provided him with the power of belief. Just what kind of terrifying power was that? And all of this had only just begun. The demon folk had only just heard of the name, Li Qingshan. Qian Rongji had yet to take action and promote her Ming cult either. The demon folk were not even believers in him, yet they could already influence his emotions. As his faith deepened, the influence would grow deeper and deeper as well, even distorting some of his thoughts until his heart wavered. That was why he refused to be worshipped and influenced by others. However, when he devoured the demon heart of Black Sun and made up his mind to change the demon domain and influence the trillions of demon folk, he could not turn down the influence of demon folk. As the king of demon gods and the ruler of the world, whether he was willing or not, he naturally became the target of worship for demon folk. And, without the power of belief, it would have been impossible for him to emerge victorious in the war. His opponents were renowned immortals and Buddhas, worshipped by the entire 6 realms of Sasra and the 3,000 worlds. Who knew how many millennia of power of belief they had accumulated. Not only did they control the laws of the world, but they also controlled the hearts of the people of the world. If he was not even willing to pay this little price, what right did he have to contend with them? Perhaps compared to them, what the 7 saints lacked was exactly this power of belief, which was why they were suppressed. War was not a game. Even to gods it was the same. The sacrifices were not just regular demon folk. He, the king of demon gods, was the most important sacrifice. Hua Qinglu gently stroked his furrowed brows with her slender fingers and asked curiously, "Do gods dream too?" Li Qingshan answered gently, "Gods are the dreams of all living beings." Dreams? Hua Qinglu blinked her eyes. She seemed to understand but she did not. Li Qingshan rubbed her head. "It's time for me to go." Hua Qinglu did not urge him to stay. She only smiled. "Have a safe journey." The flower had already bloomed, so there were no more regrets. As for when the flower watchers would come again, that would be up to the flower watchers. The traveler took away the fragrance and continued with that distant dream, a pitch-black, rainy night. The young man stood at the entrance of the alley with a little girl in a straw raincoat, clasping his hands at the carriage that sped past. After bidding farewell to Yu Zijian and Hua Qinglu who were still young, they vanished into the pitch-black curtain of rain. And then? All right. He also fought for Zhuozhibua. He was ordered to complete a mission to investigate a morgue. Actually, Zhuozhibua wanted to use the zombie Taoist to eliminate him. It was also there that he met the disciples of Moism led by Hao Pingyang. Afterwards, they ventured into the underground cavern and fought the zombie Taoist, killing Zhuozhibua. Among the disciples of Moism, only Hao Pingyang had survived until today. He could be regarded as rather talented, having undergone the 3rd heavenly tribulation. However, Li Qingshan did not plan on summoning him into the demon domain like he did with Li Long. Although the agriculture in the demon domain was underdeveloped, no other world could rival it in terms of mechanisms. Even beyond the 9 heavens could not compare, let alone the measly world of the 5 continents. After all, the demon domain had a demon god Jia. It was said that he was originally a ruler of the ancient times. He was obsessed with various mechanisms and instruments since young, learning to carve bamboo and wood into birds before he was even 10. Once he was done he could fly for 3 days straight. A virtuous sage advised him that while wooden birds were ingenious, they were not beneficial to the people. In reality, they were not even as useful as an axle that regular carpenters could polish casually. And as the ruler of a country, he should not be filled with machinery and become obsessed with these trivial things. However, he did as he pleased, completely ignoring them. He continued to be obsessed with mechanisms and algebra. Afterwards, he was exiled to the demon domain. This instead served him well. He blazed a new path of his own, harmonizing with the ways and becoming a demon god. If a god was passionate about something, then their level would be far beyond what mortals could imagine. The construction skills of the demon god Jia had even exceeded Li Qingshan's imagination. It was nowhere near what the school of Moism could match up to. And over the past tens of millions of years, he had gathered a large group of evil gods and demon emperors who were skilled in this field. It was equivalent to having his own team of engineers. He was the perfect candidate for the position of great architect. The demon domain had already been unified. What came next was infrastructure. Whether it was water infrastructure, bridges, or roads, they all had to be built. This was a revolution against the heavens, so construction had to come first. Water infrastructure could increase the production of food, greatly increasing the population of the demon domain. Roads could connect the vast demon domain together, allowing armies to reinforce the front lines at any time. Chapter 1640. The World of the Five Continents. A man walked on the main road. It was early in the morning and the sun had yet to rise. The sky was hazy, and the vast plains stretched as far as the eye could see. The air was fresh and moist. It was refreshing and refreshing. His steps were particularly brisk, but he left behind a deep footprint with each step. He was filled with boldness and confidence. Even though the dew had soaked his clothes, he remained composed as if he was walking through his own courtyard. This was his world. His name was Li Qingshan. After leaving the blossoming island, the fragrance lingered at the tip of his nose. There was nothing more relaxing than the tenderness of a beauty, let alone the fact that she was a supreme beauty, the chief of all flowers. Even if he had traveled very far away, it would still leave him with endless aftertastes. As he recalled everything that had happened last night, he basically felt slightly tipsy as he rode on the cool morning breeze. He followed the trajectory of the river of memories on his journey back home this time, seeing old friends one by one. Li Long, Shenyue, Yuzijian, Hua Qinglu. He experienced many emotions. Although there was no lack of loneliness and sorrow, it was still joyful in general, especially in Hua Qinglu's dwelling. In particular, he had flipped through Hua Qinglu's dwelling, bathed, changed, and slept for an entire night. He felt light all over. Every single bone in his body had loosened up. Sure enough, there should be a rest like this after a great battle. However, it was exactly because of this that he was in no hurry to visit the next old friend. Instead, he strolled through the plains. That was because the old friend was far too special. She was a woman he had almost wanted to marry, Han Xiongji. Back then he was still young and inexperienced. Even though he possessed some strength, he had hidden it well. However, he just happened to receive the great affection of the first young miss of the Han family, who wanted to be with him regardless of the consequences. Who knew how many beauties he had come across in his life, but this was the first time something like this had ever happened to him. To him it was not just love. It was also an extremely special debt of gratitude. The time he spent with her could be said to be the most peaceful and comfortable period of his life. There weren't any strange feelings, and if it were written into a story, it definitely wouldn't be wonderful. However, it seemed to be extremely precious to him in this life. However, in the end he could not live his life in peace. All the things that happened after that, the deceit, the failure to keep the promise, and the parting. Even now, he still felt guilty when he thought about it. Thus, he didn't want to see her in this state. He wanted to wait until the fragrance of the flowers dissipated and the aftertaste disappeared before he could face her. He couldn't help but shake his head. On this trip back to his hometown, many people's performances had exceeded his expectations. Sure enough, the human heart was the most unpredictable, even gods couldn't predict everything. Meanwhile, in the 100 Flowers Cave. Within the dense steam, Hua Qinglu currently stretched out her body, leaning against the edge of the hot spring comfortably. She smiled and thought, Big Brother Li, oh Big Brother Li, you think you're taking advantage of me, but you don't know that I'm using you to make up for my regrets from back then. In this world, who would have thought that the great Bai Hua fairy would never forget a man? But if they knew that the man's name was Li Qingshan, they wouldn't be surprised. However, Li Qingshan had always been a forgetful person. Facing the rising sun, he strode forward. As a result, as the sun rose, the aftertaste quickly vanished like morning dew. He sucked in a deep breath and inhaled the last bit of fragrance. Suddenly he broke into a smile. He felt like a husband who had gone out to have fun. Before he entered the house, he had to tidy up his emotions and excuse himself, wiping off the perfume and kiss marks. Just when he was about to cross the 10,000 kilometers in a single step and arrive before Han Xiongji, to give her a pleasant surprise, a strange buzzing suddenly rang through his head. He furrowed his brows in doubt and subconsciously listened. Everything within a radius of 50 kilometers was under his surveillance, but he failed to find the source of the sound. He could even expand the range of his surveillance to the point where he could hear everything in the world. However, the sound was only inches away, so close that it seemed like it was right next to his ear. He covered his ears with his hands again, cutting off all external sounds. However, the buzzing still did not vanish. His face sank as if he understood what it was. He slowly lowered his hands and exhaled gently, focusing all of his attention to distinguish the buzzing. Finally he could hear it clearly. It was the sound of countless people, men, women, young and old. However, it was too light and too chaotic, so it sounded like a buzzing. At the same time he also felt the gathering and growth of power. It was not very powerful, but it was like silk and strands, endless and different from normal spiritual power. Not only was he not happy, but his expression became even more serious. He stopped walking as if he was walking on thin ice and facing an abyss. "Isn't this what you want?" Li Qingshan smiled bitterly as he muttered to himself. He shook his head helplessly, his hands hanging weakly by his side. There was even a trace of sadness in his expression. Even when he faced the most terrifying enemies, he had never revealed such an expression when he was on the brink of death countless times. That power, that buzzing sound, was the so-called power of faith. Everything happened much faster than he had imagined. Perhaps last night's dream had already foreshadowed it. Like a ray of light shining through the darkest night, in the name of the demon god king, all hopes, wishes and beliefs were gathering towards him. Bit by bit, all rivers returned to the sea. As a result, the scarlet star shone brighter and brighter, gradually surpassing the 12 demonic stars that revolved around it that represented the 12 demon gods. In the past, beneath Black Cloud City and before the two armies, the military aura gathered by several 100,000 soldiers for a short period of time was enough to sweep through everything, let alone the belief of 100 trillion demon folk. It would definitely gather into unbelievably endless divine power. But what was the price? Li Qingshan had a rough idea. That was something even more precious than life, something he would rather die than lose, the 9 transformations of the demonic and divine, all for the sake of remaining unchanged. However, he probably would not be able to defeat the saying, "Rope saws through wood and dripping water wears through stone." He could already foresee that the influence of faith on him would grow greater and greater, deeper and deeper. This was the price he had to bear for the path he had chosen. That woman, Chen Rongji, had not even moved yet. The voice of a single demon folk might have been like the buzz of a mosquito, but the sound of 100 trillion demon folk gathered would definitely be thunderous, and it would be constant and never-ending. It would be filled with terror, fury, resentment, wails, all the negative emotions that could or could not be imagined in the world. Yeah, if he was satisfied with life, why would he need to pray to the gods and worship the Buddha? Even the human world could not satisfy him. Only the countless living beings would seek out the pure land of bliss, let alone the opposite of the pure land of bliss, the living beings of the demon domain that were filled with pain and torture. He clenched his hands and resisted the urge to cover his ears. He could sever all noise, sever all belief. However, he needed this power. The enemies in the sky were about to arrive. That man who seemed to be the embodiment of the heavens but wore the skin of a bear. The master of the hand that separated the pure land and the demonic land, the Tathagata Buddha. None of them were existences he could contend with right now. He needed the power of the living beings of the demon domain. Only then would he have a chance at openly contending against them. Chapter 1641. In the wilderness, Li Qingshan frowned and stood motionless. The red sun rose from the east. Before it had time to shine its light on the earth, a strong gust of wind blew in the sky, sweeping up a black cloud that was like a splash of ink. In the blink of an eye, it covered the sky. The rain poured down and the wind swept the earth. It was as if the Milky Way had burst its banks and was about to drown the entire world. Without warning, the morning suddenly became like the night. He stood in the middle of the night, unable to escape, unable to extricate himself. No matter how the wind blew and the clouds surged, the rainstorm washed over him. It was as if he was venting the pain in his heart, but there was no sound of thunder. That gloominess was like this dark night, unable to be vented no matter what. It was just like this pitch-black rainstorm, pouring down noisily. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, all living beings looked up and were shocked at this sudden change in the weather. They could faintly feel that there was an ominous sign hidden in it. Their mood also became heavy and oppressive, almost unable to breathe. Many ordinary people had already knelt on the ground, praying to the gods and Buddha. This was the power of the gods, connected to creation. With a thought, the wind and clouds changed color, and all living beings worshipped. The rainstorm caused the river to surge, the wind caused the houses to shake and the wheat to fall. Li Qingshan's heart moved and he heard many voices, which were filled with fear, begging the heavens to change their mind and stop this heavy rain. There were thousands of villages within a radius of 1,000 miles. If this heavy rain continued for a while, who knew how many people would be swallowed by the flood? Sigh. Li Qingshan let out a long sigh and took a deep breath. In an instant, the clouds and rain dispersed, and the blue sky became clear. Thus, all living beings were indescribably surprised, cheering and jumping for joy. They kowtowed again and again, prostrating themselves on the ground. However, he seemed to have sucked in all the dark clouds and rainstorm in one breath and suppressed it all in his chest. It was still a dark night and the rain poured down. All living beings can pray to the gods and Buddha, but who should the gods pray to? He sighed and took a step forward, disappearing from where he was. He tried to walk into his memories, hoping to hide from this rain. When Li Qingshan's figure appeared again, in front of him was an ordinary farmer's courtyard. The low fences on both sides were covered with vines, hugging a half-closed wooden door in the middle. A faded Fu character was pasted on the door, and a Chinese redbud tree was blooming under the sun in front of the door. Why is she in a place like this? It was not a large, majestic sect like the Sword Collection Palace. It was not like the 100 Flowers Cave abode, which was filled with blooming flowers and a beautiful secret realm in the forest. Li Qingshan was surprised. He looked around and sure enough it was just a regular village. It was definitely not an illusion. In any case, Han Qiongji was a cultivator who had survived 4 heavenly tribulations. Even if she did not have her own sect, she would definitely have her own cave abode. However, this small village could not be called a paradise. Smoke curled up from kitchen chimneys in the village. Chickens crowed and dogs barked. A wisp of smoke also rose from the small courtyard in front of him, and the smell of food and her scent came from behind the door. That's right. She's right here. However, compared to any sect or cave abode, famed mountain or secret realm, this mortal home seemed even more illusory. It actually made him feel slightly uneasy, as if he was afraid of approaching home. Thump, thump, thump. Li Qingshan rapped 3 times with his fingers. Before the sound had even faded away, the door opened and a ball of fiery red welcomed him. Han Qiongji stood in the middle of the door in a bright red dress. Her bright red lips were filled with a smile, but she was not surprised. It was as if she had been expecting Li Qingshan's visit and had been waiting for his return the entire time. You're here. Why are you so drenched? Is it raining? Han Qiongji looked at Li Qingshan, who was drenched and in a rather horrible shape, in confusion. She could not help but raise her head and glance at the sky. The sun was bright, and a few strands of white clouds hung on the horizon. Li Qingshan could not help but smile. He pointed at her right hand. What are you doing? Are you trying to murder your husband? It turned out that Han Qiongji was holding a bloody kitchen knife in her hand. If an ordinary person saw this, they would probably be shocked. Han Qiongji rolled her eyes at him. She waved the kitchen knife and said as if it was a matter of course, "I'm cooking." Then she turned around and walked into the courtyard. She took out an old hen from a cage in the corner of the courtyard. She raised the knife and chopped off the chicken's head. Then she used hot water to wash its leg feathers and cut open its belly. She was very focused and skilled, but she did not use any magic. Even that old hen was not a rare bird or beast. It was just an ordinary old hen that had laid eggs for several years. She carried the slaughtered chicken and walked to the kitchen. She was so busy that she did not have time to entertain Li Qingshan. She only said, "The wine is on the table. Pour yourself." There was a square table and 2 benches in the middle of the courtyard. There were already a few dishes on the table and a pot of old wine. The dishes were not delicacies. They were just seasonal fresh vegetables and ordinary dishes. The wine was also not bejeweled nectar. It was probably the new Hong that was hidden in someone's cellar and could not wait until the day of the daughter's marriage. Li Qingshan closed the door and sat down at the table. He poured himself a cup and drank it in one gulp. He then picked up a peanut and put it in his mouth to carefully chew. Looking at her back in the kitchen, his mood gradually calmed down. It was as if her husband had finally returned from a long journey. She could finally sit down with peace of mind and slowly drink a cup of wine. One cup after another, he drank until the pot was empty, until he was slightly tipsy. The jar of wine was at the corner of the table. He picked it up and filled it again. If he did not walk on this road to the ninth heaven, he would not want to be like this. Han Xiongji heard the sound of cups and chopsticks colliding in the courtyard. Her eyes couldn't help but redden, but she did not dare to look back at him. Her hands were flying. She washed, cut, fried, steamed, and cooked the vegetables. Her mind was in a trance as if she was sleepwalking. She only relied on the skills she had practiced countless times to cook the dishes. Some people's regret was that a young girl yearned for love and never had anything with the man she liked. Some people's regret was that they did not personally cook a table of food for him and be an ordinary husband and wife for a day. She thought that she would not have another chance. She thought that with his temperament he would definitely not turn back. But he came back. His eyes were exhausted and his expression was almost miserable. It was an expression she had never seen on his face. The Li Qingshan in her memory was always that inexperienced and high-spirited young man. She felt a stab of pain in her heart. She pretended that nothing happened and asked without turning her head, "What happened? Why did you come back?" "I came back to see," Li Qingshan said casually. "How did it turn out like this?" Han Xiongji could not help but ask. "How?" Li Qingshan only wanted to drink a cup of wine quietly. He did not want to mention the Pure Land of Demons or the War of the Gods. It's very embarrassing. I'm afraid that he was defeated and was chased back." "Ah, what a joke. Who doesn't know your man's great name in the entire universe right now? Who doesn't know?" When he was about to boast a little more, the buzzing sound that he tried hard to ignore became ear-piercing again. He suddenly lost the mood and waved his hand impatiently. "You continue cooking. Women should not interfere with men's affairs." Han Xiongji suddenly stopped and turned her head to stare at him. Her eyes were filled with tears. Chapter 1642. Who exactly are you? Han Xiongji turned around and asked loudly. The Li Qingshan in her memory was addicted to wine and women, easily angered, liked to joke around, would feel pain, fear and guilt, but he would never show such a weak expression. Even in the deepest and most desperate situation facing an undefeatable enemy, he would roar and throw out one last punch until he died. "That's right, who am I?" Li Qingshan played with the wine cup and said with a self-deprecating smile, "Probably the Lord of the Demon Domain, the King of the Demon Gods or something like that." That was him in the eyes of all living beings, a god that all hopes and wishes were placed on. And Li Qingshan was just a mortal. The ear-piercing buzzing in his ears could no longer be ignored. The black rainstorm in his chest drowned everything. Han Xiongji's question shook all the peace in this small courtyard. The fiery red figure seemed to be burning, shining so brightly that people could not look directly at it. His gaze went past her, following the mottled yellow mud wall, climbing up the thatched roof, climbing up the chimney, following the wisp of smoke, all the way to the depths of the sky. In a trance, the mottled mud wall was like a towering mountain, the thatched grass was like a forest of swords and spears, the chimney was a lonely city at the peak of the mountain. Above the lonely city there was no smoke curling up, blue sky and white clouds, it was clearly smoke soaring into the sky, black clouds pressing down on the city. "Gotcha." A crack appeared on the wine cup. Unknowingly his expression changed. The crowing of the chickens and barking of the dogs in the village, all stopped, falling into a terrible silence. Han Xiongji's eyes widened, suddenly shocked. His entire body emitted a dreadful and terrifying aura. The black figure sitting in front of the square table was like a Buddha that continued to grow larger and larger, turning into an abnormally steep and cold black mountain. The sharp peak had already pierced through the sky. No matter how hard she tried to look up, it was difficult to see his full appearance. So high, so unreachable, he had already changed. He was no longer the man she was familiar with, he had become a god that she could not understand. His pain is also not something I can understand. Han Xiongji felt a stabbing pain in her heart, and it took her a long time to calm down. She couldn't help but stare at him in a daze. His expression was fleeting and indifferent, but it contained a terrifying madness and killing intent. It was as if he was immersed in a dream of a bloody massacre. She blamed herself for making things difficult for him. They clearly wanted to be husband and wife for a day, talking about the past and drinking together. Why couldn't she give him a moment of peace? Then she would send him on his journey to the battlefield that belonged to him. Qingshan, Qingshan. An anxious voice woke Li Qingshan from his dream. He blinked his eyes. The mud wall was still mud wall and the thatch was still thatch. This was not a battlefield but his hometown. The person in front of him wasn't an enemy but a lover. Han Qiongji shook his shoulders hard. Although her eyes were filled with tears, she bit her lips as if she had made up her mind. She said gently, "You're right. This is your business. I shouldn't interfere. Hurry up and continue eating. When I'm done, I'll drink with you to my heart's content." Sorry, I was distracted. Li Qingshan focused his mind and smiled. The crack on the wine cup in his hand healed. The village was still filled with the sounds of chickens crowing and dogs barking. Smoke curled up from the chimneys. It was as if nothing had happened. It was also as if they had reached some kind of tacit agreement. Some things shouldn't be looked into. Li Qingshan reached out his hand to wipe away the tears on Han Qiongji's face. He smiled and said, "What are you crying for? Your man isn't dead yet." It's good that he's dead," Han Qiongji said angrily. This kind of inauspicious words was not a taboo for them. She, who was born in the military school, had never taken the words life and death too seriously. Just now, even if she heard that he had died in battle, she might not lose control of her emotions like this. She would only silently prepare to avenge him. If she succeeded, she would succeed. If she failed, she would die. It wasn't a big deal. It was just that the fledgling, high-spirited young man was too deeply engraved in her heart. For a moment, she couldn't admit that he was the same person as the lonely man in front of her. Moreover, this kind of change was too unexpected. She originally thought that he would be even more high-spirited and complacent after advancing bravely until he was on par with the gods. What kind of suffering did he go through to turn a man like that into this? She resisted the urge to ask. She returned to the kitchen and continued to prepare food. Li Qingshan looked at her busy figure and sighed silently. He really wasn't a person who liked to moan and complain. Scars weren't glory. They were just scars left behind by injuries. Of course, it wasn't a disgrace. It was just that when you showed your scars to others, those who hated you would only laugh at your incompetence and weakness, and find pleasure in it. Those who love you will grieve for you and even advise you to change to another path. He didn't want to be laughed at, nor did he want to be grieved. He definitely didn't want to take another path. No matter how painful and difficult it was, this was the path he had chosen. He wouldn't have any regrets even if his bones were crushed. At this moment he had an urge to tell her everything. He didn't want her to be disappointed in him, and he wanted to receive her gentleness and sympathy. "I'm probably drunk," Li Qingshan pondered while tipsy. He used to think that she and Xiao Tianjiao had many similarities, but now he realized that they were actually completely different. Perhaps the biggest difference was that she remembered what Li Qingshan looked like in the past. Even though he had experienced many difficulties and dangers, that was the appearance he had always wanted to keep. Now that the change had begun, perhaps he should explain it to both of them. Suddenly he raised his head and drank the wine in one gulp. He said, "Qiongji, do you want to hear my story?" "Go ahead. I'm listening." Han Qiongji's busy hands paused. Afterwards, she continued to prepare the dishes one by one and set them on the table. However, Li Qingshan's voice was intermittent, as if he was preparing his words with great difficulty. "I made a choice. In order to obtain greater power, I originally thought I would never make a choice like that even if it meant death." Han Qiongji listened attentively. She seemed to understand a little, but she was also rather doubtful. However, she did not ask anything. "I've never told you how Little N and I met, right?" Li Qingshan's thoughts ran wild, but he did not start from his various experiences in the human realm or the demon domain. Instead, he talked about the origins of everything. Han Qiongji nodded. "Back then, I was still in Crouching Ox Village. I was much weaker than when I first met you. I really was miserable. I worked more than I ate and I was always bullied. However, I actually never cried. I even named myself Li Qingshan, which means why should I bury my bones in the countryside? Life is full of green mountains. I'm actually quite stubborn. Just like the cow I raised, I'm not too afraid of death. However, later on, I met Little N. I cried. Although it had nothing to do with me, I just felt terrible, so I cried. At that time, I decided that I would avenge her no matter what and help her find a home." Li Qingshan's eyes were hazy from drunkenness. He rambled on, talking about many past events. However, he also mixed in the various experiences in the human realm, the Western Paradise and even the demon domain. He was disorderly, completely lacking his usual straightforwardness. Perhaps he really was drunk. Many years later, in the depths of the demon domain, he cried again. For the sake of a child, he made a decision. Perhaps the ending of the story had already been decided at the beginning. He who had not changed had made the same choice. No matter how much he yearned for the freedom of an eagle, he was destined to be a cow, and could only carry a heavy burden. I want to go to Qingqi Mountain. There's no other way. The sun gradually rose. Unknowingly, the whole table was filled with dishes. Han Qiongji sat opposite Li Qingshan and listened silently. She listened to those bizarre and dazzling encounters, listened to those distant past events, and listened to his painful choices again and again. There were several times when she wanted to stand up and hug him tightly in her arms. However, she didn't move. Instead, she clenched her fists and bit her lips, as if she was also making a painful choice. When Li Qingshan finished his story, she suddenly lifted the wine jar, stood up, and gulped down the rest of the wine in one breath. Then, with a tipsy expression, she stared straight at Li Qingshan's eyes fiercely, as if she wanted to swallow him whole. Li Qingshan was also taken aback. He looked at her in astonishment. I'm different from little Anne. No matter what Li Qingshan becomes, it doesn't make a difference in her heart. As for me, I only fancy that Li Qingshan who will never change. Even though I know he's a big bastard, and I understand that there can't be any results, I'm happy in my heart, and I never regret it. Han Qiongji said boldly. Li Qingshan nodded. I know. Then leave this world. Go die anywhere and don't come back. If you need someone's power, just summon them. The Li Qingshan I know never looks back. Li Qingshan looked at her deeply. She was like a burning flame, so bright that he couldn't look at her directly. In the depths of the flame, her eyes were filled with the figure of Li Qingshan. All of this and me are shackles for you. Han Qiongji pointed at the wine and dishes in front of her, and then pointed at herself. Her eyes flashed with a touch of regret, but she resolutely waved her hand, and the table full of wine and dishes were overturned. Then she turned around and her back faced him. You can go. Li Qingshan looked at the broken bowls and dishes on the ground, and the scattered food on the ground. She spent a lot of effort to personally make them. She almost didn't touch them and they were all wasted. Of course, as long as he moved his fingers, he could restore everything to its original state, but he didn't do so. He just looked at her back and was stunned for a while. Suddenly he smiled. I understand. I'm going. Li Qingshan left this world and ended this journey. Since he chose this path, he must walk it and he couldn't stop. Han Qiongji stood motionless in the courtyard, and only her shadow moved. Until the sun set in the west and the sky was full of stars. Just like this she passed the day. She suddenly raised her head, looked at the red new star in the distance, and poured all of her heart into it. Outside the world, the buzzing continued to follow him like a shadow, never stopping. However, Li Qingshan suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was a special prayer. Chapter 1643. In the Tao of the human realm, on the vast ocean, a five-masted ship rose from the horizon and slowly sailed over. The sail was dazzlingly white under the sunlight. It was stretched taut and carried the rolling heat waves like a large white bird carrying the ship across the sea. If one looked closely, they would find that the mast was engraved with many mysterious runes that shone faintly under the sunlight. Thus, there was no need for a sailor to steer the ship. The sail automatically adjusted its direction and maintained its maximum speed without deviating from its course. The people on the deck were all wearing Taoist robes and had extraordinary bearings. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and chatted happily. They even brought along many fruits and dried meat as snacks. It was a pleasant journey and they were temporarily freed from their daily cultivation to enjoy the sunlight and sea breeze. Everything seemed so peaceful. An old man stood at the bow of the ship with his hands behind his back. However, he was frowning as he looked at the end of the sea. Hearing the disciples chatting and laughing, he sighed in his heart, the appearance of the demon star, I wonder how long this good scene will last. After this calamity, I wonder how many of these disciples will survive. Not to mention these disciples, even his cultivation was nothing in the face of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. However, he could not say these thoughts to anyone. He had only told his disciples that he wanted to bring them to the myriad phenomenon city to broaden their horizons. However, he was actually considering merging the entire Azure Sun Temple into the Myriad Phenomenon sect. After the Battle of Black Cloud City, the Myriad Phenomenon sect had suffered heavy losses. They had been recruiting disciples and did not reject anyone. However, as the sect master, he could only be an inner disciple. Although it was said that it was better to be the head of a chicken than the tail of a cow, without a large ship, they would not be able to withstand this great storm. Once they died, everything would be over. They would not even be able to be the butt of a chicken. At this moment he raised his eyebrows and turned around. Ling Xiaozi, go and call your junior martial sister Miaozhen. We are almost at the myriad phenomenon sect. We cannot miss this scenery. Yes, master. A young and handsome Taoist immediately cupped his fists and thought, Master really loves junior martial sister Miaozhen. He quickly walked down to the cabin, and suddenly everything was dark. He had to rely on his eyes to see the path clearly. Along the way he could no longer hear the laughter on the deck. After walking a dozen steps, it was as if he had entered a deep and quiet world. But it's no wonder that you can cultivate peacefully in the cabin at a time like this. Such a temperament and bearing, in the words of Master, you really are a natural cultivator. To be able to pass through the second heavenly tribulation in such a short period of time, it definitely isn't luck. His heart suddenly surged with a fervent desire to see her face. In a quiet room in the depths of the ship, there was a pea-sized lamp with green smoke rising in spirals. A Taoist wearing a crown was sitting cross-legged on a cattail hassock. Her body swayed slightly with the waves, but her eyes were closed and her expression was indifferent. She was completely immersed in her cultivation. Junior sister Miaozhen, we're almost at the myriad appearance sect. Master told me to call you. Ling Xiaozi's voice came from outside the door. Got it. Young Miaozhen slowly opened her eyes and said softly, Thank you, senior martial brother. I'll be right there. Her voice was like the trembling of a zither, moving one's heartstrings in the darkness, but it was also as indifferent as her expression. She was like a calm and elegant zither, but she didn't ask for anyone who understood her. She played her own heartfelt song by herself. No need to be so polite, junior martial sister. Ling Xiaozi was slightly disappointed, but he couldn't feel a trace of dissatisfaction towards this junior martial sister Miaozhen. A moment later young Miaozhen walked out of the cabin and onto the deck. The dazzling sunlight caused her to squint her eyes. She saw her fellow disciples gathered at the bow of the ship, looking in the same direction. It was midsummer and the sun was blazing like fire. The hot wind blew against her face and the sky was high and the sea was wide. Her mood couldn't help but warm up, and her mind broadened along with her horizons. She could only see clear and crystalline waves flickering with the undulations of the sea, spreading all the way to the horizon. Water vapor evaporated and the air became misty. At the end of the horizon, between the clouds and the heat waves, a magnificent metropolis floated like a mirage. That's the myriad appearance sect. Young Miaozhen muttered to herself. Even if she wholeheartedly pursued the Tao, and her heart was like an ancient well, she couldn't help but be shocked by this scene. Suddenly she couldn't help but laugh. If he was here he would definitely laugh at her for not seeing the world. Then a wave of confidence rose in her. But I'm no longer the young Miaozhen from back then. Ascending from the small world to the human world was like coming from the cabin to the deck and seeing the endless sea in an instant. Only then did he realize how small he was at the beginning, and that the invincible chivalrous king who shook the world was only a strong cultivator. It was only in the small world that he seemed so strong. Maybe his real cultivation base was even weaker than her master's. She couldn't help but look at the old man at the bow of the ship and cupped her hands in greeting. The old man also smiled and nodded at her. Her master, Taoist Master Qin Yang, was a Yin spirit cultivator who had crossed 4 heavenly tribulations. He established the Qin Yang temple with his own strength, but it was only a small sect in the human realm. She heard that she was about to arrive at the myriad appearance sect. She stared at the mirage at the end of the sea and sky. A person who had crossed 4 heavenly tribulations could only become a disciple. Only a young spirit cultivator who had crossed 5 heavenly tribulations could become a successor disciple. However, it was only a disciple. Above them, there was the human immortal sect leader who had crossed 6 heavenly tribulations, and the true immortal sect leader. True immortal was already an unfathomable and inconceivable existence for her. It was also the goal that she had been pursuing all her life. She didn't know if he was still trapped in the small world. No, with his ability he probably had already broken free. Or he had already returned to his hometown, the 9 regions that he spoke of. Or he had also ascended to the 6 paths of reincarnation. Maybe he was also in the human realm. Or maybe he would meet him again one day in the future. But don't you dare bully me like before. While young Miaozhen was gazing into the distance and reminiscing about the past, someone was also staring at her. Her face, without makeup, had a kind of beauty that could topple cities. Her hair was tied up in a high bun, revealing her snow-white neck. Her figure was tall and slender, and she had a graceful bearing like a crane. However, between her indifferent eyes, there was always a trace of gentleness. Her tall figure, wrapped in a Taoist robe, exuded an even more mature charm. That was the mark left behind by being a wife and a mother. Many people in the Qingyang temple couldn't believe this and were deeply shocked. They couldn't imagine what kind of man could make her devote her life to him. At that time, she just said it indifferently, without the slightest bit of concealment. She just wanted to reduce some trouble. No matter what kind of man he is already separated from you by two different worlds. He can't keep up with your footsteps and is no longer worthy of you. In the future, the one who will be by your side must be me. Ling Xiao silently made up his mind and walked toward Yang Miaozhen. Yang Miaozhen sighed inwardly. Some trouble was inevitable. After all, although the small world was small, those who could become one of the top 10 beauties were also at the standard of 1 in a million. Although she hadn't seen much of the world, she had instead nurtured a kind of bearing and confidence. Moreover, she was able to stay indoors for 20 years in a world where spirit qi was thin and martial artists dominated. She wholeheartedly cultivated and pursued the Tao. Her talent and temperament were not what ordinary golden core cultivators could compare with. When the two were combined, her charm was naturally born. The great ship of fortune gradually sailed closer to Wanxiang City. The misty and rippling mirage gradually became clearer and more spectacular. Junior Sister Miaozhen, do you know what the most powerful cultivation technique of Wanxiang sect is? Ling Xiao came up to speak. I think it's called the Wanxiang Heavenly Book. Yang Miaozhen pondered and said, That's right. The Wanxiang Heavenly Book contains countless heavenly books. Every one of them can allow one to cultivate to become a human immortal. Ling Xiao also couldn't help but reveal a look of envy. The cultivation technique he was currently cultivating was far inferior to any of the heavenly books. Yang Miaozhen listened attentively. She was still very concerned about matters related to cultivation like this. The other disciples gathered over too. Ling Xiao became more and more excited. However, there's another saying that the Wanxiang Heavenly Book is a whole entity. Not only is it the collective name for all heavenly books, but it also contains all cultivation methods and paths in the world. All heavenly books have been derived from it. It's exactly because of this Wanxiang Heavenly Book that the Wanxiang sect can still prosper despite the war. Speaking of which, a great battle broke out between the Wanxiang sect and demon folk not too long ago. The demon domain sent out the 12 demon emperors to surround the city with an army of several million. The will of the Tao demon god descended. That battle was extremely brutal. Even over half of the Yang spirit true disciples were killed. They were almost wiped out. It was all thanks to their first senior brother, Li Qingshan, that they forced back the Tao demon god. Just now they managed to turn the tables. He was not bold enough to compare himself to the first senior brother of the Wanxiang sect, but he was still the first senior brother after all. Chapter 1644. Li Qingshan. For Yang Miaozhen this name was too unforgettable. He was not just a man who had conquered her, possessed her, or the father of her child. She was a natural cultivator, and the endless years were enough to wear away everything. Yet, only the heavens knew how lonely she was as a cultivator in the small world dominated by martial artists. She was like a seabird that was born without its own kind, flying alone towards a distant and indistinct goal. She also had the feelings of a young girl, but despite being born with peerless beauty and receiving countless pursuits and temptations, she could not fall in love. She also longed to be able to shake the martial world and become a heroine, not just one of the top 10 beauties. But despite having the talent to become a powerful martial artist, she could only stay in a Taoist temple. Disregarding everything, all she could rely on was an illusory legend, advancing alone in the darkness. She felt that she would not be able to hold on for much longer. Then he appeared and told her that her path was correct. Light illuminated everything. Even after many years, she still remembered the shock she felt at that time. It was far greater than when he first took her. Of course, she was also very happy at that time. Even though they had only known each other for a short time, she did not have any resistance. The 7 emotions and 6 desires were human nature, let alone him. Others said that she was innately cold, but he said that the path of cultivation was destined to be lonely. She still remembered when they parted. He said, "No matter how indifferent you appear, I know that you are a person who values relationships. I fear that there are still things in your heart that you cannot let go." But she did not know that he was the only one she valued, and that there was nothing else that she could not let go of. So she constantly reminded herself that Li Qingshan was only an ordinary cultivator. Back then, his cultivation was only about 3 heavenly tribulations, the realm of nascent soul cultivators. He might seem very powerful and special in the small world, but there were countless people like him in the mortal realm. Now, she only needed to work a bit harder and she would quickly reach that level. She was like this, always trying to fade the impression he left behind. However, after several decades, when she suddenly heard his name again, her reaction at this moment made her suddenly realize that everything was in vain. It was like a birthmark that couldn't be washed away with water. For a moment she did not know whether to laugh or cry. Ling Xiaozi was also stunned. He had never seen such a vivid expression appear on Yang Miaozhen's face. It was 10 times more moving than any time in his memory. If he could spend the rest of his life with her and see this kind of expression from her all the time, he would be more than a deity. It wouldn't even matter if he could become a deity or not. The disciples were completely immersed in this legend and they discussed it. Even young god cultivators can die. Are demon folk so terrifying? Is the Tao demon god a true immortal? Nonsense. Of course it's a true immortal. All 12 demon gods of the demon region are true immortals. Senior brother, how is that Li Qingshan so powerful? Everything that Ling Shuzi mentioned was far too distant to them. Young god cultivators were already existences beyond their reach, and demon gods were even more unbelievable. As for what kind of monster Li Qingshan who had forced back a demon god was, they could not even imagine it. True Master Qing Yang shook his head and interrupted, that Li Qingshan isn't just powerful. I heard that it's only been a few decades since he ascended to the human realm. In the beginning he was only at the 3rd heavenly tribulation, but it's said that he's already undergone the 6th heavenly tribulation now. He's been received into Elysium to become a divine general of the Samaras. Clearly he had investigated the situation of the myriad sect carefully before this, and as the leader of the direct disciples, the first senior brother Li Qingshan, was an existence that could not be ignored. But as he spoke, he was also frowning with a look of disbelief on his face, not much different from the other disciples. How is this possible? The disciples all cried out and fell into an uproar. Even Ling Xiaozi was no exception. Clearly he had only heard about Li Qingshan's achievements from hearsay. He did not know as much as true Master Qing Yang. To be able to undergo the 2nd heavenly tribulation in a few short decades and reach the peak of golden core cultivators, Yang Miaozhen was already a supreme genius in their eyes. However, to undergo the 4th, 5th, and 6th heavenly tribulation, which was even more difficult in the same amount of time, it seemed completely impossible no matter how they thought about it. The shock was just too great, such that they forgot to respect their masters. They could not help but become doubtful. Only Yang Miaozhen was not surprised at all. She only understood slightly, confirming her own judgment. Li Qingshan in the miniature world back then was indeed only at the 3rd heavenly tribulation. Of course, although there were many people with the same name in the world, Li Qingshan was not a particularly rare name, but she had almost no hesitation and could be 100% sure. Li Qingshan was that Li Qingshan. No matter how many Li Qingshan there were in the world, apart from that Li Qingshan, there was no other Li Qingshan who could do such a thing. It did not seem strange that the chivalrous lord who had played around in the miniature world continued to play around in the human world. That man is like this. However, what made her feel interesting was that true Master Qing Yang became a little unconvinced in the face of the disciples' doubts. Well, maybe he hasn't undergone the 6th heavenly tribulation. He's at least a young spirit cultivator who has undergone the 5th heavenly tribulation. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to be the eldest senior brother of the Wanxiang sect. She almost laughed out loud, although she did not know why she wanted to laugh. It was probably like a child who had been trying hard to surpass his father. Finally, one day when the child gradually grew up and became tall and strong, he discovered that his father was not as tall and strong as he remembered when he was a child. He was even shorter and thinner than other people, but he suddenly discovered that his father's hidden identity was the richest man in the world. There were probably not many people in the world who had experienced such a wonderful feeling. Yang Miaozhen smiled slightly. The deck suddenly became quiet, and all the disciples looked at her in a daze. The male disciples glanced at her and were about to immediately look away, but they could not help but look at her again. It was as if they were facing a ball of light that was too dazzling to look at for a long time, let alone ignore. On the contrary, the female disciples all looked at her without blinking. There was no jealousy, only admiration. Ling Xiaozi simply could not control himself. He was completely dizzy and did not know why she suddenly smiled. After knowing her for so long, he seemed to have never seen her smile like this. Miaozhen, you know that Li Qingshan? Even true Master Qingyang suddenly became slightly excited. He was not as lustful as his disciples, and keenly noticed Yang Miaozhen's strange behavior. Reporting to Master, I know him. Yang Miaozhen was a man of few words, but she did not lie. Junior sister, you know Li Qingshan? It can't be someone with the same name, right? All the disciples were shocked. No matter how much they admired Yang Miaozhen for a moment, they could not connect the distant legend with the living person in front of them. Then, what is the relationship between you two? True Master Qingyang became more and more excited, and the way he looked at Yang Miaozhen was even more fervent than Ling Xiaozi. He wanted to rely on the myriad appearance sect, but he also wanted to sell it for a good price in exchange for some resources. Only then would he have the opportunity to go one step further and cross the fifth heavenly tribulation. True disciples and advanced disciples, Yin spirit cultivators and Yang spirit cultivators, the situation was very different. If he could rely on his relationship with the myriad appearance sect's eldest disciple and have Li Qingshan recruit him into the myriad appearance sect, the treatment would definitely be better than relying on himself. Moreover, when the Great Tribulation came, he would have a great backer, and at least he would not be casually treated as a sacrificial pawn. Yang Miaozhen hesitated for a moment. She wanted to say, he was once my husband, but when they parted back then he had personally said, they were not husband and wife. Although he was helping her separate, she had always been very concerned. She deliberated and said, when we were in the small world, I gave birth to a child for him. No, that's impossible. Ling Xiaozi's body trembled in disbelief. It must be someone with the same name. She did not want to believe it, but she had no choice but to believe it. If it was not that kind of man, how could she have fallen in love with him? True Master Qingyang was overjoyed, but he still had a trace of doubt. He was also afraid that it was someone with the same name, and he had rejoiced for nothing. At this moment, the myriad appearance city was right in front of them. In the shallow sea, a majestic human-shaped statue gradually appeared from the misty water vapor. It had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and it was resolute. It was clad in armor, and its hand was on a long saber, as if it was guarding the myriad appearance sect. It was probably the product of some true disciple's flattery. Everyone thought that after Lin Xian, the battle for eldest disciple had been settled, and the myriad appearance sect would welcome another long reign. True Master Qingyang pointed at the statue and asked, is it like that? Yang Miaozhen stared at the statue and seemed to be infatuated. She mumbled, it's exactly the same. Ling Xiaozi's face was ashen, and his last trace of hope was extinguished. True Master Qingyang did not care about his eldest disciple's feelings. He suppressed the excitement in his heart and asked again, disciple, why did you two separate? With such a peerless coattail, why did she bother to cultivate in his small Taoist temple? If she had joined the myriad appearance sect earlier with Li Qingshan's care, she would have become a nascent soul cultivator, at least with her talent. There would not be any grudges. Disciple? Yang Miaozhen was tempted to roll her eyes. After coming to the human realm, the one thing that had disillusioned her was that cultivators were not as pure and desireless as the legends said. Most of them did not possess Li Qingshan's spirit of bravery, determination, and fearlessness. Among a group of people, she was the one who was most like a cultivator, including her master, the head of the Azure Sun Temple. Most of the time he did not have a proper career. Not only did he indulge in good wine, but he also liked to wander around. She said matter-of-factly, I want to ascend. Does he treat you well? True Master Qingyang asked one last test. He treats me very well. Yang Miaozhen did not hesitate. Good disciple, how do you think I treat you? True Master Qingyang rubbed his hands together and actually showed a flattering smile to his disciple. However, no one found it strange. Other than Ling Xiaozi, the other disciples of the Azure Sun Temple looked at Yang Miaozhen with reverence. It was as if the person on the statue was her. Good disciple? Yang Miaozhen finally could not help but roll her eyes. Chapter 1645. All Yang Miaozhen could say was, Miaozhen is indebted to Master. The sect master roused with vigor, so he no longer kept it a secret. He finally revealed his true objective, to merge the entire Green Sun Monastery into the Myriad sect. The disciples paled in fright and all tried to dissuade him. Ling Xiaozi objected even more vehemently. He was the first senior brother of the Green Sun Monastery. When the sect master was out traveling, he was responsible for all matters in the monastery. He could be described as someone who stood above several dozen and below only one. If the Green Sun Monastery merged with the Myriad sect, he would only be able to become a registered disciple. He would only be ranked at the bottom of the hierarchy of disciples in the Myriad sect. Then he glanced at Yang Miaozhen and felt his heart ache. If the Green Sun Monastery really does merge with the Myriad sect, junior sister Miaozhen will be able to reconnect with that Li Qingshan, but I'll forever have to rely on him. Yang Miaozhen understood the sect master's plans. Her feelings were rather mixed. After all this, do I still have to return to his side? The sect master had been expecting the disciples' reactions. The human realm was extremely closely connected to beyond the 9 heavens. Basically all the great sect masters of large sects were true immortals. The conflict between sects was not even as intense as the 3,000 worlds. Not only was this because the sect masters were all old acquaintances, but it was also to deal with the expansion of the demon domain and avoid pointless internal strife. The battlefield in the demon domain was extremely intense, far more intense than regular battles between sects, but the responsibility of fending off the demonfolk's invasion was basically all on the large sections. They did not force the smaller sects to take part either. If they did not want to contribute and take the initiative to take part, everything that happened on the distant border could be treated as a story. Under these circumstances, the smaller and smaller sects of the human realm and the various independent cultivators could be described as living peacefully. If peace lasted for too long, people would forget what war looked like. They might even lose their imaginations of war. Even when phrases like the demon star of Mars and the great calamity of the world hung by their mouths, it did not feel real at all. They just felt like there would be someone taller to hold up the sky even if it collapsed. The great immortals and gods above the 9 heavens would never turn a blind eye. The worst-case scenario was just an endless battle. The sect master said firmly, "I've already made up my mind. There's no need to persuade me otherwise." He sighed again and said something like, "You're all too young, you don't know the power of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. Master is doing this for your own good, you'll understand in the future," and so on. Although the disciples couldn't understand, they couldn't disobey their master's orders. They were a little disappointed and didn't have the mood to go on a sightseeing trip. However, when they disembarked from the ship and arrived at Wanxiang City, the scene in the city caused their spirits to rise. The city was filled with people. It was so lively that it didn't seem like a cultivation sect, but a mortal city. However, there was no such magnificent scene in a mortal city. Tall buildings rose from the ground, each with carved beams and painted rafters and arched eaves. Long bridges ran through them like rainbows and elegant cultivators walked on them. The balconies of the floating gardens were like exquisite flower pots. Strange flowers and plants bloomed within them. Many cultivators were sipping tea and discussing the Tao. Tired of looking at the vast and empty scenery on the sea, everything in Wanxiang City was dazzling and too much for the eyes to take in. Everyone almost forgot the disappointment of the sect's disbandment. But very soon the sense of disappointment returned and became even stronger. Even Yang Miaozhen felt it. It turned out that there was nothing special about us. Although the sect master of Azure Sun couldn't compare to the Wanxiang sect, in the eyes of mortals, they were extraordinary immortals and outstanding talents. And now there were cultivators everywhere. There were hundreds, thousands or even tens of thousands of them. They didn't find anything special about them. Instead they looked around like country bumpkins entering a city. The shock in Ling Xiaozi's heart took a long time to calm down. He muttered, "Is that Li Qingshan ruling over this place?" Spiritual Master Qingyang glanced at him and knew that this disciple was unwilling. He said, "The Grand Sect Master of the Wanxiang sect is in charge of the imperial study for the Celestial Emperor. The 2 sect masters follow him to the 9 heavens. The Grand Sect Master's mount, Spirit Venerable Guihai, oversees the heavens and deduces the Wanxiang Heavenly Book. He doesn't care about secular affairs. Therefore, all the major and minor matters in the Wanxiang sect are handled by the true disciples. And as the head of the true disciples, Li Qingshan has the authority to command all the true disciples. Furthermore, in the Battle of Black Cloud City, he forced the incarnation of the demonic god Swanee to retreat, and all the true disciples were saved by him. His prestige in the sect is extremely high, and it could be said that he's the ruler here." When mentioning the 3 sect masters, Spirit Venerable Guihai, and even Li Qingshan, he would cup his hands towards the heavens. His words were filled with reverence. There was a saying, "The older one is in Jianghu, the more timid they are." In fact, the higher one's cultivation and the wider one's experience, the more one understood the power of many things. Therefore he didn't feel that there was anything shameful about relying on connections and cozying up to Li Qingshan. Even the high and mighty Yang spirit cultivators and true disciples had to rely on Li Qingshan to survive. What was there for him to put on airs? Ling Xiaozi was speechless and lost his wits. When a story was no longer just a story, the storyteller would also lose that calm and composure of talking and laughing. Spiritual Master Qingyang patted Ling Xiaozi on the shoulder and continued walking into the city. Looking at the many cultivators in the city, he thought to himself, it seems that many people have the same idea as me. In the Battle of Black Cloud City, the Wanxiang sect lost more than half of its true disciples. If it had been an ordinary sect, it would have suffered a great loss. It would have taken at least 1,000 years to recover. However, the Wanxiang sect relied on the huge amount of rewards from the desireless heavenly palace and the abundant resources accumulated in the 100 herb garden to recruit disciples. Coincidentally, the demon star appeared. Many small and medium sects and even loose cultivators had the same idea as spiritual master Qingyang. For a time, a large number of people gathered, and the sect became even more prosperous than before. Of course, the root of all this was that sky. Spiritual master Qingyang raised his head and looked up. He saw a 3,000-meter-tall building piercing through the clouds, standing majestically above the Wanxiang city. It also had the power to soar into the clouds. The pedestal on the east side of the world was a stone wall that was more than 100 feet high. The stone wall was smooth and shiny, and only the top was engraved with the words, List of all creations. Under the sunlight, many names could be seen. The name that ranked first was Li Qingshan, surpassing all the other disciples. The people of the Qingyang temple looked at the stone wall for a while and couldn't help but become more intimate with Yang Miaozhen, calling her junior sister and senior sister non-stop. Spiritual Master Qingyang practically kept calling her disciple, and didn't call her Miaozhen Zi anymore. Yang Miaozhen felt very uncomfortable. She felt like the weight of the entire sect was on her shoulders, waiting for her to find Li Qingshan. She wasn't worried that he wouldn't care about old feelings, he was more serious than she imagined, but she was worried that when the time came, she didn't know how he would play with her. Chapter 1646. On the central axis of Wanxiang City, there was a majestic hall whose height was second only to the sky. Along with it, there was a large cluster of buildings on the mountainside. It was dazzling and extraordinary. The sky had the aura of ascending from the bottom, but this cluster of buildings had the aura of descending from the top. If the Wanxiang sect was compared to a country of cultivators, then Wanxiang City would be the capital. This cluster of buildings was similar to the Forbidden City, an administrative center like the Senate. It was responsible for handling all matters within the city or within the country. It was called the Direct Inheritance Hall. As the name suggested, it was the Hall of Direct Disciples. The Wanxiang sect was jointly ruled by direct disciples, so one could imagine its status. All the internal affairs of the sect had to be handled here, including the disputes between the true disciples. In the main hall of the Direct Inheritance Hall, a female cultivator was furrowing her brows and writing at a rapid pace. She wore a luxurious purple dress, and her black hair was tied up high like clouds, complementing her snow-white skin. She was a rare peerless beauty in the world. However, her expression was solemn and dignified, and her temperament was dignified and noble. She had the demeanor of an empress. The 9-feet-long table in front of her was located on the central axis of Wanxiang City and even the Direct Inheritance Hall. It was the third senior sister, Dai Mingfan, who was in charge of the Direct Inheritance Hall. No matter who was the eldest senior brother, she would always be the third senior sister. Therefore, she was called the Eternal Third Senior Sister, in private, or the Eternal Third Senior Sister, by the other direct disciples. If the eldest senior brother was the ruler of a country, controlling an army and conquering everywhere, then she would be the prime minister of a country. Then she would be the prime minister of a country. She would have to attend to a myriad of affairs every day. All the internal affairs of the sect would be handled by her. Senior sister. Qingyang Temple's Qingyang spiritual master wants to see you. A female disciple tiptoed in and said softly. Perhaps because she was too busy, the third senior sister's temper had been getting worse recently, as if she had changed into a different person. In the past she was gentle and friendly, talking and laughing, and was considerate to everyone. However, she was also dignified, making others not dare to offend her. Now, all the subordinates were careful when they saw her, not even daring to breathe loudly. I won't see you. Sure enough, Dai Mingfan didn't even raise her head. Her tone was filled with impatience. In the blink of an eye, all the information about the Qingyang Temple, its origin, development, current situation, the names and cultivation of the chief and the main disciples, was in his grasp. He immediately came to a conclusion. What bullshit spiritual master Qingyang? He's just an old piece of trash who can't survive the fifth heavenly tribulation in 3,000 years. However, his disciples Ling Xiao and Miao Zhenzi were worth recruiting, especially Miao Zhenzi. It was said that he ascended from an extremely small world, and in a short few decades, he reached the peak of Jindan stage from the initial stage of foundation establishment. Because the spiritual energy in the small world was thin, it was difficult to ascend. This kind of person's talent, temperament, and luck were usually very outstanding. Moreover, she was a female cultivator, so she was worth paying attention to. If it was a normal day, she might summon it to take a look, but she wasn't in the mood right now. Recently, there were more and more people like this. They refused to join the Wanxiang sect properly and wanted special treatment just because they thought they were some lousy temple master. All of them came to her to annoy her. But considering the image of the nature sect, he added, "You go and entertain them. Be tactful." It was impossible to have special treatment. The myriad appearance sect didn't lack an inner disciple, let alone a so-called genius. Yes. The female disciple accepted the order and left. However, Dai Mengfan's brows furrowed even more tightly. Her gaze drifted about as she wrote furiously. However, her attention did not seem to be on the desk in front of her at all. Instead, she was thinking about something else. Actually, no matter how complicated the matter was, it was nothing difficult for a young soul cultivator to handle. A single thought from her could surpass the 3 days and 3 nights of contemplation of so-called sages among mortals. Her true worry was actually the same as the Qingyang masters. It was the impending crisis of the world. Her position was even higher than the Qingyang masters. She was closer to the sky, so she could see more things. She could already smell the bloody scent of war as well as the rotting stench of death. With her talent and cultivation, she originally had the chance to become the first senior sister, but the monarch had to preside over the war against the demon domain. It was exactly to distance herself from war that she had always been the prime minister in peace. Dai Mengfan was a noble. She cultivated arduously for the sake of longevity, not to throw her life away against demon folk. However, there were some things that she could not do anything about no matter how clever she was. Once the crisis of the world arrived, even true immortals would struggle to protect themselves, let alone a mere young soul cultivator. Not to mention the fact that a true immortal had already died the moment the Mars demon star had appeared. Regular cultivators might not be able to tell the difference between gods and the trichiliocosm, but she could. Back then, she watched helplessly as the star erupted with bright light, tore through the sky and fell towards the ground. In her raging thoughts, everything in her memory seemed so slow, basically falling inch by inch. In the depths of the pitch-black sky, a scarlet star suddenly lit up. It gave her nightmares for a whole night. From then onwards she changed. Panic, anxiety, the impending crisis. In a flash of her thoughts, there were also the worries of fools among mortals, the worries that they could not resolve even after contemplating for 3 days and 3 nights. She was like a gambler who owed a loan shark money. The creditor would come knocking on her door the next day, and she would bring over a dozen thugs with her, yet she could not even produce a single cent. The atmosphere of the entire Wanxiang sect also changed. Guihai Lingzuan closed the sky, no longer read any books and no longer saw anyone. The inherited disciples all began to cultivate desperately, or collect magic weapons to prepare for the great crisis. More and more small and medium-sized sects wanted to merge with the Wanxiang sect. But the strange thing was that the 9th heaven fell into silence, and the stars seemed to be shocked by the Mars demon star. For a moment they did not know how to react, or what deeper plans they had. Therefore, with the human immortals as the boundary, the cultivators below became restless, each looking for a way to survive, like ants before a rainstorm, climbing up the trees as much as possible. But the immortals and emperors above were completely silent, stingy and unwilling to issue a decree to explain the appearance of the scarlet star in the sky. No one knew what they were planning. In this complexity and silence, there seemed to be an invisible string stretched taut. The moment it broke, everything in front of her would collapse. Moreover, she had a very bad premonition that was tormenting her. It seemed that something bad would soon befall her, and the worst thing was that she could not be sure if this was just a normal panic or if it was real. She could only work hard to focus her thoughts on the work in front of her, and gain a sense of control over her fate. Her right hand drew a series of afterimages, and the printing machine filled up the white paper. Just when she felt that she was about to succeed, the female disciple just now walked in again, immediately interrupting her thoughts. What now? There was a hint of anger in her voice. Third senior sister, spiritual master Qingyang has a female disciple. He said that she is an old friend of eldest senior brother, the female disciple said with a trembling voice. Dai Mingfan stopped writing and looked up. Really? That's what he said. Chapter 1647. In a side hall next to the direct inheritance hall, Dai Mingfan's arrival caused the people of Azure Sun Temple to feel flattered. The aura she exuded immediately pushed them into the ranks of her subordinates, yet they willingly submitted to her. If it wasn't for the fact that kneeling wasn't popular in the cultivation world, the disciples of Azure Sun Temple would have probably knelt down like mortals seeing the emperor and shouted, "Long live!" Ling Xiaozi couldn't help but secretly compare her to Yang Miaozhen, but he had to admit that the peerless elegance of this direct inheritance hall master completely overshadowed the brilliance of junior sister Miaozhen. This wasn't a difference in appearance or temperament, but rather an innate difference brought about by the naked difference in power. He still dared to have lustful thoughts when facing Yang Miaozhen, but when facing Dai Mingfan he couldn't even raise his head. His mind was blank, not daring to have any distracting thoughts. Senior. Spiritual Master Qingyang excitedly cupped his hands in greeting while sighing inwardly at the charm of the three words, Li Qingshan. It was actually able to make the direct inheritance hall master personally come to see them. Dai Mingfan almost didn't even look at him. She lightly raised her right hand, and Spiritual Master Qingyang immediately shut up and quietly waited to the side. Everything seemed natural and didn't make people feel the slightest bit rude, like a senior greeting a junior. From the moment she entered, Dai Mingfan's gaze fell on Yang Miaozhen and she praised inwardly, truly a beauty. She immediately believed that her relationship with eldest senior brother was not shallow. She beckoned her to come in front of her and said with a smile, "You are Yang Miaozhen? Senior knows me?" Yang Miaozhen couldn't help but walk over, feeling overwhelmed by the favor. Of course, everyone of Azure Sun Temple, especially fellow Daoist Qingyang, I have long heard of your great name. Dai Mingfan's gaze swept across the people of Azure Sun Temple before returning to Yang Miaozhen. Calling me senior is too distant. Junior sister, since you want to join the Myriad Appearance sect, you can call me senior sister in the future. The people of Azure Sun Temple couldn't help but let out envious gasps as their gazes focused on Yang Miaozhen's face. Senior. Senior sister. Yang Miaozhen's heart was thumping loudly, her cheeks were hot and red. She needed to use all her strength to calm her mind so that she wouldn't be completely affected by this charming and amiable senior sister Dai in front of her. Junior martial sister, why don't you become a disciple and get used to the environment of the Myriad Appearance sect? What do you think? Dai Mingfan lightly held Yang Miaozhen's hand and spoke in a negotiating tone. This, my cultivation seems to be, then it's settled. Although the ranking of the Myriad Phenomenon sect wasn't based on individual cultivation, but rather on contributions to the sect, the position of Hall Disciple was usually reserved for nascent soul cultivators who had gone through 3 heavenly tribulations. After all, it was impossible to make so many contributions without that level of cultivation. However, Dai Mingfan could adjust these rules flexibly. Contribution points could be slowly increased, and cultivation could be slowly increased. Since she was eldest senior brother's old friend, as his junior sister, she had to take care of her. It could also be considered as forming a good karma. Maybe she could save his life in the future. If it wasn't for the feelings of Chao Qianjiao in the 9 heavens, who wished she could also become eldest senior brother's old friend, the current him was probably even more reliable than before. Perhaps no one in the Myriad Appearance sect could imagine that the dignified and dignified third senior sister would actually have such worldly thoughts. However, to her, the most important thing was to live. The fundamental purpose of cultivation was to live a long life. If she couldn't live, everything would be an illusion. If she was trapped in the chaotic demon cocoon in the Cold Blood Pass, she would probably have immediately fallen to the demon emperor. Only spiritual master Qingyang suddenly realized that this high and mighty direct hall master was just like him. He was also trying his best to cling on to eldest senior brother Li Qingshan's thigh. A storm was approaching, and all the weak were trying their best to cling onto the wings of the strong. However, in the Great Tribulation, how many people could be called absolute experts? Perhaps Li Qingshan was one of them. After making arrangements for Yang Miaozhen, Dai Mingfan expressed her welcome to the Azure Sun Shrine and had a friendly talk with the Shrine Master, Spiritual Master Qin Yang. The talk did not last long, but it was very successful. In just a few words, Spiritual Master Qin Yang received a generally satisfactory treatment. For a moment both the host and the guest were happy. All disciples, listen up. Right at this moment, a voice that was as cold as ice and as vast as the ocean resounded from the sky. With the highest point of the sky as the center, it rippled through the clouds like a tide and spread to every corner of Wanxiang City, causing all the cultivators to tremble and perk up their ears to listen. The bustling myriad appearance city instantly quietened down. It was as if he was announcing the true ruler of the city. In the direct teachings hall, Dai Mingfan was also shocked. Spirit Sage Guihai had actually spoken. Furthermore, he was speaking to everyone in such a high-profile manner. This was unprecedented in the history of the Myriad Appearance sect. Could it be that the Grand Sect Master above the 9 heavens had sent an order? Or could it be that Spirit Sage Guihai had deduced the future fate of the Myriad Appearance sect? Regardless, it must be related to the Chaos Demon Star and the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. Myriad Appearance sect disciple Li Qingshan has betrayed the sect and fallen to the Tao of Fiends. From this day forth he will be expelled from the Myriad Appearance sect and stripped of all his status and assets in the sect. Spirit Sage Guihai's words were even more shocking than his voice. The Hall of Inheritances was dead silent. Everyone was stunned. Dai Mingfan's eyes widened as a bad premonition reverberated in her heart like a scream. Dai Mingfan will take over the position of eldest disciple and be in charge of everything in the sect. She will continue to be the direct teachings hall master and lead the Xuanwu army and Blazing Inferno army. Dai Mingfan could not help but spit out a word, fuck. Yang Miaozhen, who was nearby, looked at her in disbelief. All of you wait here. Dai Mingfan said that and turned into a purple beam of light that flew into the sky. Spiritual Master Qin Yang looked like he was laughing and crying as he said with difficulty, "What are you talking about? Miaozhen Zi, why did he fall to the Tao of Fiends instead of being the eldest senior brother?" Good disciple, turn back to Miaozhen Zi. The Azure Sun convent disciples could not help but distance themselves from her, forming an empty space around her. Ling Xiao hesitated for a moment and did not take a step closer. Before Dai Mingfan left, when she said, "All of you wait here," her eyes were clearly only looking at Yang Miaozhen. For some reason Yang Miaozhen did not feel worried. Instead, she felt like laughing as she muttered to herself, "That man is like this." Soon Dai Mingfan returned. This newly appointed eldest senior sister did not have a hint of joy on her face. Instead, it was extremely gloomy and dejected, as though she had suffered a huge defeat. She looked at Yang Miaozhen with a gloomy expression, as though she did not know what to do with her. The other Azure Sun convent disciples could not help but distance themselves from her, afraid that a fire at the city gates would implicate the fish in the moat. Spiritual Master Qin Yang could only sigh inwardly and pray for his own good. However, he had already achieved his goal. With Dai Mingfan's status, she would not go back on her word. Ling Xiao wanted to step forward, but under Dai Mingfan's terrifying pressure, he did not dare to take a step forward. He only stared at his toes like a child who had done something wrong. Yang Miaozhen, on the other hand, became calm and said with a smile, "Congratulations, eldest senior sister. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."